charity.
Hello, everybody. Well, we didn't have our off-mic discipline starting today, did we? So I'll just go biggly, biggily, biggily, biggily. My fellow Westorians, I'm Aziz. With me is Ashea, and this is Valar Rereadis. Each episode of Valar Rereadis for the Winds of Winter will feature a guest or guests. We'll take a closer look at each chapter, going through them one by one, instead of in batches. More discussion potential comes with these new chapters. We have little idea what we're getting into. Some of these chapters are still very misunderstood, or at least maybe there's mysteries still to uncover. So we're pretty excited about that, getting into these. A standard warning must apply as well. These chapters are subject to change by the time we see them. You never know what changes George might decide to make. But for the most part, we don't expect too many changes. Today's guests are our good friends from the Game of Owns podcast. Hello, friends. How are you?
Hello.
We're excited to be here.
Very excited to be here.
Yeah. So
Sorry
you got
for our, not decorum at the beginning. We were just already hanging before we even started.
Yeah, we couldn't help ourselves. We're just so chatty. We've been friends for a while. This group of us here, and we were just goofing off talking about video games and pool tables, and I don't know what we were actually talking about when we started, but something like that. And yeah, you guys are on the road, as a lot of you watching will be able to tell. If you're listening on podcast, that's going to remain secret until I said it just now. So you guys are traveling. You're in North Carolina right now, right? That's pretty fun.
Yep.
Yeah, we are. We've got just a place set up, work from home energy, hanging out for a little while we're all stuck, not going into our usual places. So it's been pretty fun.
That is cool. Yeah, we're glad we can make it work. That's neat that you guys are still able to call in from there. Thank you, modern technology. Thank you, streaming tech. Well, what have you guys been up to over at Game of Owns? It's actually, from what I understand, we're somewhat aligned right now, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah, we just actually, our last episode was the second to last Barry chapter from Dance of Dragons. So I just had to catch up the last chapter between this one, the Queen's Hand, and got to refresh myself on Barry 1 TWOW, Barry 2 TWOW. Honestly, it's made me feel so amped today because of the nature of what we're going over.
Right. And we've just been so deep in Marine over the last. So we're coming to the end of our reading order. Probably just 4 or 5 episodes left before we finish the ends of our Dance with Dragons reading order. And so we're deep into it. Couldn't be a better time for us to be talking Winds of Winter.
Can we spoil everyone and tell them that you guys? I'm just going to say it. They're going to be coming on our Queen's Hand episode at the end of our reading order.
Yeah, we're doing a little.
We're doing it out of order, but all the same energy. We'll go back and pick up on the rest. Aziz, you're frozen right now on our screen in the best way.
I'm an Iceman. I'm a statue.
Yeah, our internet here is not the best, so I'm hoping that it holds out. So.
Well, as long as the audio holds out, the video is just a bonus, right?
Right.
So yeah, that is really cool. You guys are in the same spot, so your minds are wrapped up in Marine. As we noted here on Valar Rereadis, the end of Dance with Dragons is something like 10 of the final 18 chapters are in Marine, so it's really really quite focused there. And of course, all of the Winds of Winter chapters that we're covering here at the start are Battle of Fire focused, Battle of Slaver's Bay, so we're not going anywhere from Marine until, here we'll be moving away from Marine in 2 weeks. Next week we'll do Barristan 2, and then, that is it for the Battle of Fire chapters on our end, and we'll be heading over to Westeros for the chapters over there, as well as Mercy and things like that, so that'll be fun.
Right. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How do you have your opinions about these last chapters, all bunched in Marine, changed in this reading order, or rather the coverage that you guys are doing now since the last time you read it? Yeah,
definitely. I think I even maybe said something to that effect. I can't remember if I said it on the podcast or just expressed it to someone who asked me. But yes, a Marine is, I'll admit, it's difficult. It can be, if you don't have the energy to figure it all out, and I can understand that, especially because it's, like I said, it's difficult, and if you've only read the series once or twice, it probably doesn't it's probably not fully clear. But once it is clear, it's pretty amazing. And yes, it is a challenge. It's a worthwhile challenge. But I have to admit that I probably even myself didn't have some of the nuance fully understood. There's a couple of important key details I only somewhat got and hadn't necessarily framed them with the rest of what was going on. And I definitely hadn't made some of the really strong thematic connections between like the challenges John is facing versus the challenges Dany is facing, and how similar those are. And that is just brilliant. Seeing this is, I think, if I could say about myself, the thing I did better this time through that I didn't do when I was a younger reader was understand themes and literature stuff that I wasn't as strong on. I was more caught up in just fantasy details. That was my kind of my pathway into all this in the first place. And I'd like to think I'm more comprehensive with my analysis now. What about you guys? Let me turn that question around to you guys. Yeah.
Same really for me.
Totally. And even just, so we did this chapter on Game of Thrones probably like a year and change ago. And so before we came on today, I was kind of listening to it back just to kind of refresh my memory on what my thoughts were even a year and a half ago. And even from then, I feel like just because we've been in the trenches with these last we've been in Marine for so long, I feel like even my understanding this time around as well has just been so much more nuanced and enriched, because when you take things chapter by chapter and when you take things sentence by sentence and you're not necessarily reading for plot anymore, you're kind of forced to pick up on some of those details that, as you were saying, Aziz, like as a younger reader, you're reading just to get to the end, but we've been where we're at for a decade. And so, we can have the time to slow down and actually enjoy it.
It reminds me of analyzing classical music composition that a composer a couple hundred years ago put out, where at the time it was of entertainment of the day and everyone's soaking it up and they like it or they don't like it. But we have all of this time, decades, centuries later, to understand the meaning of what they were channeling into it and how it translated the current time period. And I feel like the complexity that George has written specifically at the end of Dance, where, like you said, it feels sort of difficult and your understanding of it might fall apart as you're reading with the momentum of an actual reader. What we're doing right now is like the beginning of, I feel like the beginning of that long-term analysis that people will be able to do much in the future, and they're going to understand it way better than we are right now, because they're going to have so much time separated from it. Like, we're able to look at those classical pieces of music and understand their complexity even more.
That's a really good way to put it too, because, and to add on to that, I'd like to say that, with the way we approach the material as well, keeping in mind the way, like you said, the way like Hannah said, the way the ending is already there, we already know it, and the way that we can, instead of just immersing ourselves in the plot, which is great, of course we care about the plot, but that is where we're paused, right? And other than discovering things we hadn't seen before that might have impacted how we view the plot, we pretty much know that stuff. But like, for example, if you were to look at, something that we've talked about occasionally on Valar Rereadis, and the value of this series now and the way we engage with it, and it's sort of a expression of, this is something that came from the fact that we do this on Sundays. Some people have started to call it it's like a Song of Ice and Fire church. But just, it's becoming more and more apt, because we use a Song of Ice and Fire, we use like small stories, kind of like how people in like Bible study will look at stories. They'll take a small story from the Bible and they'll analyze it in modern times and like, how does this apply to us now? And you don't try too much to judge the characters in the story in the time, because they're not, we don't know, we don't face the challenges they face. We're not living in their experience. So we try to apply it to our modern living and try to say, well, what can we learn from this? How does this have value to us in our life? And that's a lot of what goes on in church, is sorting through that. And that's really valuable. And we have some
school teacher right now.
And that's really fitting, because this, in one of the big sections of this episode today, is we're going to talk about prayer and how people use prayer to deal with fear and other anxieties, other things that are just way outside of individual control, things that just, as human beings, we have no control over. And this is a way that there's a lot of that in this chapter, so it's a pretty good time to bring it up.
Those things come up to the surface whenever you're facing impending doom or impending action where you all must act. I like that. That's among the last thing that Barry says to his captains and to the other people around when they're about to leave. It's like, you have to get to those things that we don't normally discuss with each other. That's normally not necessarily faux pas, but unnecessary to get into.
And with so
At last
many,
left on the table.
yeah, and with so many cultures represented here, Barristan notes, and that's something else we're going to talk about. There's so many. There's the Unsullied. There's Barristan. There's Basilisk, the guy from the Basilisk Isles. There's guys from who are locals. There's guys from Lazarine. There's just so many cultures represented. They each have their own ways of dealing with death and fear, and that's one of the things that makes it really fascinating is seeing these varieties, and yet there's something in common that unites it all. They're all feeling the same emotion, even if they're dealing with it a little differently. So that's very
love what you all, I know we'll get to it, but you were talking about the sort of greater elements being revealed as part of getting more into the details with this particular pace of your reread. I love the detail that y'all put in the doc of creating a reverse order of what might be. You were mentioning John before, of what might happen with the White Walkers, and how it's I can't put it into the same words that you put in the doc, but it sort of a preview of the fire side of the two sides of the fire and ice element right now with this, knowing that at this point in the story is really exciting.
Right on, yeah. Well said. Well, let's start with some meta chapter history. We like to give a little detail on how this chapter came to be and where it came out and all that. Something that's long been the pattern in publishing is that the hardcover book comes out first, then they'll wait a few months, then they'll release the paperback. Some people wait for it since it's cheaper, but publishers will incentivize the people who already own the hardcover by adding something new to the paperback. In A Song of Ice and Fire's case, there's always been a sample chapter added to the back. If you go way back to Game of Thrones Book 1, there was a Theon chapter at the back of it, the paperback. My first experience with this personally was reading Cersei 1 in the back of A Storm of Swords at a mall bookstore in Atlanta. I was like, hey, there's the book. Let me see. Cersei! I had no idea. It was so exciting.
I can imagine you standing there beside the bookshelf reading that. Right
well, they had seats, so I sat down. But yes, I would have stood. You're right. You're not wrong. I would have just, I would have done what I had to do.
Young Z's.
Ebooks haven't really displaced this pattern. They've really just given people additional options, so it still works this way. For example, the paperback bonus sample chapter for A Dance with Dragons was this one. You guessed it. Today's chapter, Barristan 1. And it hit stores October 29th, 2013. Now, that actually makes it sound like it's one of the earliest sample chapters. After all, Dance with Dragons came out in like June 2011. So we're talking only 2 years later. This chapter came out. But it wasn't. It was the third fully released, but the sixth chapter that came out after Dance with Dragons. As we've said, Theon 1 was first, Arianne 1 was next, and then this one for the fully released ones. And then as far as chapters read aloud at conventions, there was Victarion 1, Tyrion 1, and interestingly, Barristan 2 before Barristan 1. So George was having a little fun there. Maybe he hadn't finished writing it all the way. Who knows? One day maybe we'll find out. What are your all's impressions of what we have so far as the sample chapters? We have some Battle of Ice stuff, we have Battle of Fire, we have Forsaken. Any overall kind of takes on what we've got so far?
Do you want to go first?
I think that it's clear what he sort of expected us to know based on being able to delve from the end of the published book, from the end of Feast and the end of Dance. And he gave us what he had sort of already decided on. And it's cool to see it. I think the most surprising for me was how integral to the plot moving forward Arianne's journey is. And I think that might come to the surprise of some people who also weren't really rooting for more of a Dornish element to continue the color of the story, but it's clear that it will. I know that that's something that the show did not go into, so it's exciting to see that decision be decided so early for me. From the Forsaken, the really long-reaching, mysterious elements for me were not really touched on, but it was cool to get the groundwork laid out and to get me excited for seeing those two key battles take place and how they'll come together. What about you?
Well, I kind of was thinking about it a little bit more on a meta level because I feel like my relationship, just like with the sample chapters, has changed so much over time because as they're being released, a long time since we've had any new content, like direct content sample chapter kind of wise. And I feel like the farther that we get away from the publish of Dance of Dragons and the closer we eventually get to the publishing of Winds of Winter, how much has changed necessarily in George's mind, in his writing, in his layout of things. Probably not a ton, but I just feel like the sample chapters, I just look at them a little bit differently than came out as this like gospel truth of this is exactly what it's going to be, and we're going to get this information in a couple years, and this is kind of like the build up and excitement for what comes next. It's been a really, really long time. And so obviously these major details aren't really going to change, and it's not like he's going to get rid of the Forsaken in the Winds of Winter or anything wild like that. But I do have a different relationship with the sample chapters, just because there's a lot of information there, but there's time that has progressed between the different books being published. And so I'm curious to see what may or may not have been changed, and kind of what George's thought process is as we potentially get more sample chapters before the Winds of Winter comes out, and what that might look like, and then what they might actually look like in published form, because it's just been such a long time.
Yeah.
So.
I'm so excited that we got dragons flying over to it.
That's so cool. Yeah.
It's enough to keep you going.
Right. I'm like, holy crap.
Something that's interesting to me too is that, like, thinking back to when we first read this chapter and, you know, got the summary for Barristan 2, we didn't have the show telling us that Barristan was going to get, you know, stabbed or die some way. Even if he doesn't die that same way, the possibility that he dies before seeing Daenerys again, or that he dies just before getting to Westeros, let's say, just generically saying, putting that simply, like, we don't know in the details, but let's say he never gets that far. That's something I hadn't thought about a lot. Good example of just a small detail that George probably hasn't changed his mind on, but it's something that the show, even if it's completely wrong, it gave us something to consider. And
right.
So that's something we'll do today. At the end, we'll save that question for the end. I'll have you guys give your predictions for Barristan, what may or may not happen with him, and a couple other predictions that I have for. I want to ask every guest we have on for the Battle of Fire what's going to happen with some of these basic things that are mysteries. So you guys will get you to weigh in on some of those later on. Let's have a quick synopsis here. Barristan the Bold sits astride the silver horse of Queen Daenerys, the mother of dragons, the reason they're where they are today, though she herself knows none of this. He's been dealing with politics and intrigue, and that is not his specialty. Battle is, however, and he sets out to impart as much of the confidence he's earned over his life to the men around him who are preparing to charge the Yunkish armies. We've been over the importance of morale many times, and Barristan seems to clearly understand that as he stands tall in the saddle, moving slowly, showing no fear, yet admitting that he feels it. He doesn't present an unrealistic standard of fearlessness. He reminds them all that everyone is human, everyone feels fear, nor does he speak of glory or even duty. Without duty, they wouldn't be there preparing to fight in the first place. As for glory, survival will be reward enough for now. All of this has happened before, he tells them, by pointing out the overwhelmingly common pattern of humans going to war and fear being part of every single instance. He seeks to make it seem more normal. And he's got a point. On the other hand, a few of them may have looked up at the dragons and flying corpses, the fire atop the pyramid, the seemingly fearless, unsullied freedmen standing nearby, and the fact that a legendary Kingsguard knight is leading their Miranese coalition, a Westerosi. Noting all that, they might disagree a little with calling this normal or something that's happened before. In fact, it seems like anything but unprecedented. It's definitely unprecedented. But that doesn't make him wrong. He's just focusing on the feelings within, not the dangers without. Because without dealing with the former, at least somewhat, you can't deal with the latter at all. They have a good plan, but a lot can go wrong. It is a battle, after all, and they want to return through the gates the way they came in, not flying over the walls as one of the corpses that we see here in the first line. Through the gloom of night, the dead men flew, raining down upon the city streets. And that, my friends, is Barristan 1. The gang prepares to charge, a.k.a. a man, a plan. Barristan, Skahazadhan. In the Battle of Fire Up, we actually called it Sound the Attack, which is how the chapter ends. It's a reasonable way to call it, but, you know, we wanted to go a little farther this time. So we got y'all's reaction to the Winds of Winter chapter overall. What about this specific one that we're here to work on today? What's your general overall take? How does it make you feel? What does it make you think about all that?
This chapter is really exciting because I feel like where we are in Game of Thrones right now is Barristan is just very uncomfortable with the situation that he's in. He's very much out of his element, fish out of water as he's trying to play the political game. And he says time and time again how much he just doesn't like that. And finally, we get to see him doing the things that he likes to do, which is hyping his guys up, riding around in his armor, ready for battle, thinking about how he's going to be the first guy to charge through. And I feel like it's exciting. Barristan feel like he can at least navigate better this situation. They're outnumbered. They've got the Pale Mare flying through the streets. They've got, a million different things that are kind of against them. They have to rely on all these sellswords. And so it's not like the ideal battle setup. I don't know if there is an ideal battle setup, but to finally get the momentum moving and finally getting to see him in a more comfortable position. Like, this is something that he can do for Daenerys. This is something that he can lead the charge on. It's not, he's the guy and this is what he does. And when we actually get to see him participate in what will likely be a legendary battle. And It's a really great chapter. I loved it.
Isn't it weird to think this is his comfort zone? This is a comfort zone? Like, what? Did you see the flying corpses?
Exactly. Flying corpses, how, people are going to basically pee their pants and cry for their mom on the battlefield. And he's like, this is where it's at for me. And so I'm happy for the guy, you know?
Yeah, he's less comfortable in boring conversations where he can tell, he sees everyone looking around trying to get margins on each other. And he's like, well, I'm way at doing this, but I'm better equipped than you in the middle of chaos because I know how to keep my head, and you really haven't been preparing for it as much as I have. For his whole life, basically. Like, that's his thing, like you were saying. I agree with what you just said, and I think that as far as the writing is concerned, that once you reach the elements of Barry looking around and seeing the fire getting lit at the top of the pyramid, keeping in mind who's carrying what banners. We have a Kingsguard banner being represented. We have a Targaryen banner being represented. It seems like he's back home in a classic Barristan Selmy sense without outright saying it. But if you know his history, it's like it's so at peace with who he is on the inside and who he's really protected for most of his career. And then seeing the sunrise.
Full of his speech.
It's just, I knew this chapter needed to get written if there was going to be a fight. And I don't think that George could have written it any better with how it's just the patience that he put into giving us the placement of all the different troops and their individual activities, of how they reacted to the bodies flying and where they were standing, things like that. And the way that he's treating the three people that they're crazy names, but the three of his trainees that he brought up, his squires that he brought up to fight with him. It's just it all is it's the perfect embrace of all of the details that have led up to this moment. And so, I mean, that George released this early because he knew for sure, no matter how much he changed as a person or how much the world changed around him, that the dominoes that he had already set up, I really think that this was a perfect way for them all to come together. And I don't know, I just the way that we have the sample chapter ahead of time like this is so enticing for the
yeah. I almost asked, is having these chapters more of a tease, or is it
it's the right amount.
We love a good tease.
Yeah, it's the right tease. It's the right amount.
So something else that's different about the Winds of Winter, given we know these chapters are at the beginning, we certainly haven't had a book before, and I asked this of my previous guests the last couple of weeks as well. What do you guys think of the fact that we're having a book start off with battles? We haven't had anything like that. We've certainly had excitement at the beginning, but none of the other books started with battles. We're much more likely to have battles at the end of the books and something like an aftermath at the beginning of the next book, or neither, right? This is completely unprecedented for this series. So how does that feel, and what do you think that might do for the rest of the structure of the book? Like, if we're starting with this, where does that, that means we're not going to just have battles all the way through. So yeah, what do you all think?
Well, we were talking about this chapter being a little bit of a tease. I feel like we've been building up to this battle for so long, and not
that's true.
Wise of us talking about it, but like as we've been slowly going through the chapters and we've been in Marine talking about this battle until I feel like I have nothing new to say about it anymore. And so I feel like we kind of have to. I mean, I think that it would almost be a disservice for us to have spent so much time kind of in the trenches and leading up to this moment to then have to continue to wait and to continue to like draw this whole thing out. It's going to drive me crazy. And so I feel like it has to start off with this battle. Otherwise I would lose my mind. So that's not like a very literary analysis kind of thing, but it's just him has been so high, and I think that slowing that down to maybe set the pieces a little bit differently. The pieces are set and everything is ready to go. And so we don't need that time,
George said that the Victarion chapter starts, like his exact words were 5 minutes after the end of A Dance with Dragons. So we do have a pretty confident quote from him that it's going to be right away, but that was a while ago. So like you said, something could change, but it seems pretty certain. What do you think,
And
Zach?
This isn't the only fight that we have to look at too. I think that as far as the books are concerned, just sort of guessing the elements of them based on the rest that we have available and the names of the books themselves, it makes sense to me that we hit the ground running like this. Like it's like you're jumping on a treadmill and it's already going 9 to 13 miles per hour, and you have to keep up with it. You're grabbing the sides and you're trying to catch up with it with your feet. That's basically what we're going to be doing. And I think that once that's over, then we have what the Winds of Winter really is, which is that the suspicion that I have is a feeling of sort of battening down the hatches and preparing for what's to come after this. The fallout from these things will be so great, and there will be so much to deal with, and I think that we're going to be surprised in a lot of ways, or maybe not surprised if we keep analyzing it for years to come at this point. But I think I don't think we have that much more time to wait, hopefully, but still I think that it makes sense that we're coming into the book like this. Like I said, I think the bulk of the Winds of Winter is going to be dealing with this in a way that is sort of making us feel more serious and more prepared for the scale of how big the next stuff that we have to deal with.
That's a good point. Yeah, because mentioning scale, because you start off with these like large numbers of people all in the same place or a couple of different locations gathered for these battles. And what a way! Like after Hannah, like what Hannah said, we go a decade or so and start off with a bang, right? We don't lead in, we go boom, battles, multiple. I'm really wondering whether he's going to like stay with the Battle of Fire and just do it all like back to back to back to back until it's done and then go to the Battle of Ice, or if we're going to go back and forth. That's another thing we've never really had.
What a blending of temperatures and flavors that would be.
That would be
right.
wild.
It's crazy. Yeah, like we've had the Blackwater didn't have that. It switched around POVs within the battle. It did not go elsewhere until it was done. Right. It was very.
That makes sense for book 2, though. You know? And so we come into book 6 like this, and whether we're bouncing back and forth sections, fine, but where do we go from here? We go further into Westeros with a greater, more dangerous threat potentially, with us attacking people that we've been waiting to attack, with us mixing forces with people that we've been waiting to attack after they've been attacked. And then in Essos, we have other free cities and places that have not been attacked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we don't know what that looks like yet. And so it's going to be way more serious than now. And I think that they're going to give it all that they've got. I think everyone is going to give it all that they've got, because something like this has not happened in this way in any histories that we have to look at any scale. They've been sending off basically free companies to fight for them proxily out in the disputed lands. It hasn't really been brought to their front door yet. And
that's true. Like
whoever survives this and wins this and has the force from this fight is going to be knocking on the doors of those places that have been paying other people to fight for them for the longest time.
Mm-hmm. And that's really important too, because with this stuff with battle, George is really interesting in how he writes battles. He doesn't stint on the action. He makes it exciting, but he, just like every other chapter he writes, he includes layers that have little to do with the battle. They are foreshadowing other things. They're speaking to other themes, or they're just trying to make it all very human. That's something George does really well, is it's not just battle, it's how human beings cope with battle and cope with aftermath and cope with all the fear. Because technically, y'all read the chapter. I'm speaking to the audience, but also you, my friends here from Game of Thrones. It's not, there's no actual battle in this chapter. There's lots of talk about it, and we know it's about to happen, but technically there's no fighting in this chapter. It's just the build up to that. It's just coming. And that tension and that mood. So let's talk about mood. That's one of the most dominant features of this chapter. And we talked about it a little bit at the beginning. The way people deal with it is an important factor here. So just laying out all the things that the soldiers and the citizens of Meereen have going on around them. We've got the plague and the death and the war and the famine, as we talked about in our Valar Rereadis. I think it was probably episode 9 of A Dance with Dragons, something like that. We talked about how there was the Four Horsemen theme was very strong when Astapor had its own kind of, well, we called it the Astapor-apocalypse. And it's continuing a long line of very direct hell metaphors from Slaver's Bay, what with the slavery and the heat and the people shaping their hair into horns. I mean, come on, right? That's hell. So it's sticking with the biblical themes here. The savior is Daenerys here. If anyone's a savior figure, it's clearly her, and she's missing. They don't know where she is, and we know she's alive, but as is a really important thing to keep in mind for the actual characters dealing with the situation in the story, they don't know whether she's alive. So there's massive anxiety over whether she's even still alive. And when she does inevitably return, it's going to seem like a resurrection of sorts to some people, because they're going to have either cynically or just whatever reason, just they thought she was dead. Because some of them think she's dead. Like, some people are certain that she's dead. None of our 3 POVs do, but lots of people do. And so that's something else that's really different here is when we had, we have dragons, we have politics, we have sellswords, we have the Volantene fleet coming. So it's really just, as human beings who have not faced any of those things, I haven't faced one of those things in my life, let alone all 12 of those things. We really can't put ourselves in their shoes. We can try a little, but we just can't do it. But we just have to know intellectually that it's just unbelievable. And so what I think is going on here, Barristan is using what I'm not some sort of expert in psychology, but I think what he's trying to do is you can parse it from a psychological perspective. What he's trying to do is bring, he knows what they're feeling. He's felt it before. This is kind of funny. He even says, you may defecate yourself. Everyone's done, right. I did that in my first battle. He's kind of saying, he's kind of saying everybody poops, right?
Right. Even a guy like him,
Sometimes he does, believe it or not.
So he knows that in that moment, they're all in their own heads. They're all very internal. They're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? They're praying, they're worried, they're anxious. I mean, there's obviously some exceptions. There's a few other Barristans in the crowd who are just like tough, really tough-minded or what have you. But most of them are just pretending to be tough. And so he's trying to bring them outside of themselves. That speech he gives is very like, you've been afraid. Everybody's been afraid. You've done this. Everybody does that. Don't think about it. Just do. He's trying to get them out of their head and think, just swing your sword and move on. Don't think about your feelings. Just do what you got to do. And I find that that's kind of it's a basic, but it seems kind of effective. And I think that's really applicable. Just in terms of you find one of your friends is scared about something, that's a normal thing to try to do. You try to get them out of their head about it. Don't think about it too much. Don't overthink it. Especially if it's something you have to face. Like, if you have no choice but to face it, it doesn't do you a lot of good to worry over and obsess over it. Right. What do y'all think about this aspect of it? This is partly what makes Barristan so comfortable, I think, is that he knows how to deal with this. It's not that he's not afraid. It's that he has certainty of what to do.
Right. He's like and I like how he mentions, I've been through a million battles. There's men across the land sitting in their local inn talking about and reminiscing all the battles they've been through. People live. He says some people will die, but most of you will make it. And kind of, I think, reminding, because so many of these people, like we talk about, like his little knights, and all these people are really green. And this is a situation, we're kind of talking about these biblical references. It's apocalyptic. I mean, this is the thing. And so even if folks have lived through some sort of trial or conflict, it's probably not at this scale. And so just that reminder, that steady hand from somebody who has real experience, and he's like, look, I've lived through it. All these other guys have lived through it. So as you're saying, just like get out of your head and let's get going. And that's kind of what we were talking about, Barristan being in his element. I mean, the speech that he gives, if you didn't read the chapter and you're watching, I would definitely go back and read those couple paragraphs, because he just is able to, even for myself, I'm like, I could probably follow this guy. I'm a scaredy cat. I'll follow this guy through battle. Like he really captures the spirit of what's going on here. And so I think that just a reminder of I'm the guy and I've been the guy and I'm still going to be the guy. Got me hype.
Zach, it's kind of like saying words aren't always wind, are they? You could say maybe, right?
Right.
That's the thing. We have Barristan as our commander in this situation, and so I said it was good writing, and I think that mathematically, that without Barristan, they don't really have a chance. But I think that with the way the numbers are spread and the way that they're surrounded, and with the weird potential magical elements that might come into play, and especially with Dany not being there yet, I think that mathematically, the way the dominoes have been set from the first pages of A Game of Thrones leading to this eventual conflict, that the person that needed to be here for them to be successful was Barristan. And so I think that I think that his speech is a lot along the same path of why it's good writing, because his speech is good because he's just being honest. Like, that's why it's going to work for them to believe it. That's why it's working for us to read it and to like it, because this is what he's been through and this is what he knows to be true. So he's just being honest about it. And that's why it seems so effective, because there's no BS. It's like Aragorn standing at the gates of Mordor and he's giving his final speech. He's basically saying, like, I'm scared too. This is going to be crazy. This might happen and it might kill us all. And
but he's poised when he says it, right? And that's really important. He's like, look, he's like,
and he looks cool at the same time.
Yes,
that helps.
That does. You're right.
See, that's part of Barristan's knowledge. That's part of the reason why he is so effective. It's like when he got prepared to fight Kraz, and cleaning himself and preparing his armor in the same way. It wasn't just about the armor being effective in close quarter combat. It's all part of what he knows to be true.
It's like the ritual. He's mounting Dany's mare, like he's
exactly.
It's the trappings of power, right? Melisandre says,
yeah,
power
exactly.
And it's not power in this sense. The power means courage and confidence. Yeah.
It all matters. He's a human being, and he's taking up and absorbing all the different elements of being a human being the most effective way. The outside stuff, the inside stuff, as well as the political intrigue, as well as the mathematics, as far as what they're facing literally in the battle, as well as looking at the different insecure parts of the wall. I think that he's overlooking Skahaz and the Brazen Beast, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But he's basically taking stock of most of the details that he needs to be successful. And like I said, I think it's just good writing, and it's keeping us right on the needle of things might go really bad or things might go really good. And that's why it's so good. It's why it's not boring to read, because it's right there in the middle. That tension is so perfect.
Yeah. Even though we kind of know Team Dany's probably going to win, it doesn't mean people we care about.
Well, we don't know how they're going to win.
Yeah.
Either,
how?
Yeah, right. Or who might die. Like
she's not
said.
there. I think that, and I know we'll get to this later, but just because we're on the subject, I think that the way that Team Dany wins is going to be reflective of the point that I just made, where it's sort of just right in the line where we're not that happy about it and we could be a lot more sad about it. I think that that's just good writing. He's just reflecting that sort of creative tension between black and white that turns into gray, and all the different layers that he can in the story, and all the different ways that he can express it in the story.
Yeah, well said. Our contributor, Joe Buckley, who is, I should give a shout out to Joe and Nina, who have been continuing their participation in our documents and helping us have our episodes be as good as they can be. So shout out to the Isle of Faces podcast, Joe Buckley, and Nina Friel's goodqueenalley.tumblr.com with one L in the alley. Check those out. You'll be hearing some of their takes throughout this episode. First one coming right here. Joe puts it really well. Barristan is a Kingsguard. He's been a Kingsguard most of his life. Going out and killing the Queen's enemies. You really can't put it more simpler than that. Like, that is, Kingsguards are supposed to defend against enemies. There's no defense like a good offense. They're going to premeditated, preemptive strike rather. And yeah, so one thing that we will talk about throughout this episode is mirroring. We're going to focus on it at some point, but we're going to kind of go in and out of that topic throughout the episode as well. And one thing we've already spoken to in prior Winds of Winter episodes is some similarities between these POVs that are watching the Battle of Fire. In particular, Barristan and Victarion have a lot in common, even though as warrior types. Now, of course, they have huge differences as well. And one of those differences is here in how they deal with it. They both give speeches. Now, we don't have Victarion's speech. It's part of the chapter that's missing at this point. But we can guess that he doesn't say anything like, I'm afraid too. Like, no way, right? So whereas they both have this sort of exhilaration for battle, Barristan is way more sympathetic with the men around him, where Victarion is more like contemptuous of fear. And he's like, look, if you're afraid, you're going to get left behind. He probably says something like that. He's probably more like, it's about reward, it's about glory, where Barristan's more about, we just got to get through this. You know, right. Be brave, you know, hate them if. Here's a great line that I think is really applicable, and it's our next discussion point here. He says, it's absurd. Battle is one of the silliest, ridiculous, dumbest things that people do. And in order to face it, a lot of times you have to be something that you're not, right? You have to work yourself up into a type of person that you've never been. Like, if you're not a killer, if you're not someone that's comfortable with killing, which most people aren't, well, you better learn that real quick, or you will, because you're in a kill or be killed situation. That's why he says things like, the foe you see before you is just another man, and like as not, he is as frightened as you. Hate him if you must. Love him if you can. But lift your sword, bring it down, and ride on. Like, definitely Victarion didn't say something like that. Maybe the part about bringing it down and lifting your sword. That part, he's like, yeah,
no love from him. Yeah.
He wouldn't, the word love is like never left his lips, probably. Right. So that's extremely different. But still, it is still a way of dealing with fear. It's a way of dealing with battle and dealing with this intense, like, unbelievable situation. So let's talk about that a little bit, like how it works you up, how you have to change who you are to get through a situation like this. And that really very much relates to Barristan trying to get these guys to not be too much inside their heads, to not see how the difficulty of this change, to see how you have to be someone else to get through that. How does that resonate with you all as a concept and as a difficult thing to face?
I think it's like exercising a muscle. You can't achieve the growth until you put it through that stress.
Oh.
And you can decide to do it, or it can be a part of your life if you have a labor job and you're forced to do it for other reasons, and it's part of the mechanics that you're going through. But either way, there has to be some kind of an impetus and then action to force a kind of transformation to take place, whether you like it or not. It's gonna have to happen. And I think that when you look at the people smarter than me talk about needing to have fear in order for bravery to happen, I think that the concept of bravery is a meta concept until you actually go through those actions. And I think that if I could put it into a sequence that has some imagery associated with it, it might not be the best part of the story for people to visualize it, because I think he probably experienced it at this point already. But think about the tracking shot where they were following Jon around the Battle of the Bastards when he was fighting. Inside of all the tumult of chaos of people fighting around him, it was imagine your adrenaline, your heart rate pumping over 200 at that point, and you don't know what's happening next. What up?
We got a Xerxes sighting here.
You have to physically go through the motions in order to achieve what you're trying to accomplish in a fight. You have to actually swing your sword and hit people, and you're scared that whole time. And I think that, or like when he was inside of the shack at Hardhome, I think that physically moving through the things that you need to do while you're afraid is what Ned Stark was trying to describe to Bran at the beginning of the story of what bravery actually is. That it's a concept until you have to physically act through it. Mm-hmm. And then when you're acting through it, there's a transformation that's happening, whether you like it or not. It's a part of those actions. So it's a few different concepts, I think, getting mashed together at one time. And that's not to mention the kind of transformation that's going to happen to you after all of it if you survive. There's going to be different parts of you that come out, and you're going to have to deal with the falling action of the things that you've done, kind of growth. But when you're in the middle of doing something that raises your heart rate, that makes you anxious, that makes you scared, that is what people are referring to when they talk about bravery. that just going through it and not freezing up. That's what bravery is. Like going live on a podcast right now with the energy.
Yeah, before we hear from Hannah on this, let's go ahead and fill out that circle. You mentioned Ned, and that is one of the first like big quotable lines of the entire series. When Ned says to Bran, "A man can only be brave when he's afraid." That is extremely similar. It's a more succinct version of what Barristan says here. Every boy feels the same way on the eve of battle. I, and grown men as well. Those Stormcrows over there are feeling the same thing. So are the Dothraki. There is no shame in fear unless you let it master you. We all taste terror in our time. Yeah, what do you think, Hannah?
Well, I think that so much of A Song of Ice and Fire is about kind of mastering your identity and kind of mastering like who you are and what your narrative and story is. And I think that this battle and fear is kind of like the refiner's fire when it comes to change. And this is going to be one of those defining moments that changes a lot of people who are participating. And so I think that as we talk about going through hard things, I think that just so much, to me, this is a zoomed in perspective of kind of what's happening on a larger scale with people through A Song of Ice and Fire, and this change and this rising to meet expectations and this need to be something in order to get the job done, and it need to kind of meet everybody else in order to grasp power and things like that. And so
well said.
What Rory is trying to do, which is zoom in while also being zoomed out.
It's also a microcosm of the changes that to us in a modern society with our own ideals need to happen on the face of Essos, and it's exploding in Meereen, probably one of the more fierce and storied places that hold a lot of these old concepts that we don't necessarily subscribe to. And so with these individual problems that our characters are facing in their own way, each individual person in the fight are dealing with bravery and change in their own little way. The actual face of of Plantos itself is going to get scarred and need to heal over and change in the same way.
Yeah. So the fear here, what's some interesting way this transitions is it's not a real feature of the Victarion chapter, even though they're going to the same battle. Now, to be clear, I'm sure there's lots of fear on those Ironborn ships. Just because Victarion himself is a bit of a weirdo doesn't mean the rest of the Ironborn. He is, yeah. He just deals with it differently. He's more like he faces it like with an attitude. He's like, I'm not afraid. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, you kind of are, but he handles it pretty well. Like he certainly isn't the type to freeze up or anything like that. But yeah, he's not going to admit to fear. Where Barristan is more giving into it and living within it. Victarion is sort of fighting against it and doing a good job. If we're being honest, it doesn't seem to motivate him too much in direct ways. Though in other ways, he's an entirely fearful person in terms of like his superstitions and his attitude towards women. It's all fear. So this chapter really humanizes fear, and I think that's a thing that is a huge contrast, because you go from people who should be afraid, but we have a character who's not sympathetic to that, who's aggressive against that, to someone who completely understands it and who fully gives into it. Now Tyrion is the more quote-unquote normal person here, because most of us aren't warriors, and Tyrion is not a warrior. We're not like Tyrion either, but he's more normal in that, oh my God, we're about to face all this, and he's doing things that you shouldn't do, but you can't help yourself. He's like rationalizing. He's like counting the dangers, you know. It's like, I don't think that's necessarily the right way to do it, Tyrion. I think you're more working yourself up more. And that speaks to his inexperience with these such a situations, and that Barristan just handles so well. So I think that's something that's very different about this battle compared to the others in the Song of Ice and Fire. At Blackwater, we had Tyrion, Davos, and Sansa. Tyrion's on the fight on one side, Davos on the other. Sansa's giving us the inside look at the Red Keep. Even though Tyrion made a brave charge, though, and Davos fought a hand-to-hand battle on the deck of his own ship, these are not warriors. Like, Tyrion's not a warrior spirit guy, and certainly Davos isn't either. He's a smuggler. He's a father. He's a hand, right? So when we've had warrior POVs, they've been like one-on-ones or small-scale engagements. Barristan fighting Kraz, you mentioned. That's a perfect example. Victarion fighting Sir Talbot Serry, you know, catching his sword in his hand. Those are build-ups to seeing these true warrior types in large battles, and that's something I think to be interested in and curious about and to be excited about as well, perhaps.
For sure.
Okay, let's talk about prayer. We said we'd get into that. This is a good time for that. He has his own prayer. The chapter takes place entirely in front of these gates, but he has a few memories of the very recent past, meaning like earlier in the day or the previous night. He's thinking of himself praying. He says, "You come for all men in the end," he had prayed, "but if it please you, spare me and mine today, and gather up the spirits of our foes instead." And that's he's talking to the stranger. Flick commenter Rolling Knight had a great comparison take. This is another example of mirroring or paralleling. That's a lot like saying that's a lot like the TV version of Sirio's line to Arya saying, "What do we say to the god of death? Not today." I'm like, that's very much true. This Barristan's version is like the polite, like, please, whereas Sirio's is like has the independent attitude, like, no, not today. But Barristan's is more of the like, you're the higher power, or you to say, I have no say in this. Who am I to say not today? I'm a human. You're the gods. I can't,
right.
You're not going to listen to me. So let's talk about how prayer and yielding to a higher power can assuage fear. Let me throw out a few bullet points and I'll let y'all run away with this concept. This is what we were just saying with Tyrion. Like, Tyrion is going, how could I possibly survive this? He's thinking of the danger. He's calculating the thing. It's like Han Solo captured this very well when he said, never tell me the odds. Like, once you're in a situation, your odds of survival, knowing your odds of survival don't help you. It makes it worse, right? You just got to get through it. So the idea kind of this is kind of getting into the nuances of a little bit of how faith, quote unquote, works, which maybe isn't the right word, but whatever. If you accept that your fate is in the hands of a higher power or powers, the odds, they're irrelevant. There is no math. There's no odds of survival. It's completely irrelevant. The gods have decided when you're going to die. The rest is window dressing. It doesn't matter if there's 1,000 arrows flying at you. If the gods have decided you're not going to die, Jon Snow's not going to be hit by those arrows when charging at the Battle of the Bastards. So he's going to get really lucky, according to Dave and Dan.
Yeah.
And but it's that kind of thing. Like Stonewall Jackson, the Civil War general, had that attitude, and it was really infectious with his troops. Obviously, not a fan of the South having. I'm not saying I wish the South had won, of course, but let's be clear in a way that I probably didn't need to be clear. But he was a Southern general, and he said, like, God has fixed the point of my death. Like, God has decided when I'm going to die. I don't know when it is. So he didn't like take cover or do things like that. A lot of times he would just stand there really tall and like in the saddle and like unbelievably brave. But if you have that attitude, it makes sense in a way that if you truly sincerely believe that the gods will decide when you're going to die, things like, how could I possibly survive that is an irrelevant thought. And that's a lot. Right. That's really hard for a lot of us to wrap our minds around. So Barristan surrenders to that inevitability. Tyrion can't help but wrap his mind up in it, and he's intent on making Penny see it that way. And that's something we talked about last time. It's really kind of off topic, but I think Tyrion had it wrong. Penny doesn't need to be told the odds. She needs to understand they're in danger, but she doesn't need to have all the precision like that.
Doesn't help.
And Victarion sees it as an opportunity. Victarion's like, I'm going to show the gods how awesome I am. Right? That's kind of how I see it from his perspective. So I want to let you guys run with all that. I hope I didn't say too much. It's not too much to bite off at once, but I think it's a really neat concept.
It's good context because as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about when Barristan was praying and he was thinking about how his gods are far away across the sea, but he was told that they would follow him wherever he would go and that they would protect him wherever he would go. It made me think, in contrast to Vic, he's got Mokoro physically at his side, and he's seen the things that this red priest has been able to accomplish for him recently, and so he's kind of got a little bit more of that assurance and ego boost because he's reaped some of the rewards of what this priest has been able to offer and to do physically, while Barristan's gods are seemingly far away, and he has this hope and idea that they might be able to help him. But I think we're at this interesting point in A Song of Ice and Fire where we're actually going to start seeing some of this religion really come into play, and we're actually going to start seeing some of the benefits of people who've been praying all along this way. I think that that's going to really shift the tide, especially when we're talking about some of like the red god and things like that. So I think that while it may not necessarily make a huge difference in this battle in particular, it might, but it might not. I think that down the road at some of these other larger conflicts as well, we might also see some very real what's the word I'm thinking of? Just like some very real outcomes based off of this seemingly mystical idea of a god or gods or some higher power.
Yeah, and Zach, that's really well said. Zach, before we get your answer on this, let me throw in one more example. Another character who expresses an attitude about their gods, like a Victorian, sort of adopting new gods along on the fly here, because he's very superstitious and he doesn't really question that sort of thing. Yeah, but we also have someone like the Red Lamb, who we're going to talk about the squires specifically in a minute. But so this is almost a segue, but he is the one that stands up and is like, if I go before my god, I'm going to break his crook over my knee and then yell at him like, why did you make your people lambs when the world is full of wolves? So he's got some like very much like angst about reality. That's something very realistic. There's definitely people who who are strong believers in a higher power, in a god, who get angry have anger at their relationship with the deity or their god, whoever they worship, because they see the world as unfair and blame the creators of the world for that unfairness. And that's something that humans have to deal with. And anyway, so I'd love to hear your take on all that, Zach.
I think that putting the sort of scaffolding of trying to understand how the world, at the end of things, where it's thank you.
I feel like you're going in, so like you're like leaning
where
in.
where it becomes when you're at the end of it and you're guessing whether or not there's a greater power, or you're relying on the mathematics of a situation. And like you were saying, there are none at that point. When there's so much chaos, there really isn't any. And so I think that if we look at Barristan, for example, the way that he prepares himself, his process, think of it as your ritual, your routine. Cleaning himself so well, better than he's ever been scrubbed, is not necessarily going to make him better for battle. But I think that preparing yourself in a way that is true to you, that if you've thought enough, like I haven't to the level of his character, but I think George obviously has, and that's probably why he only writes in very specific ways on his word star processor in a very specific environment. It's kind of like the same thing that Barry does. Like, he sets himself up for the right amount of success for whenever he's putting his fingers on the keys, whether it's the gods coming into play, whether it's the universe itself, whatever you believe in, he's doing all the necessary preparation to give himself the best outcome possible in this situation. And so I think Vic does it in different ways. Obviously, he doesn't think about it as deeply as Barristan does. Not many characters do, but we see other characters do things like sharpening their swords or practicing right before battle, things like that. Like, these are all different things that some of them have physical consequences to what you're doing, and some of them have metaphysical consequences to what you're doing. And I think that we saw Barristan doing things that can help him physically in preparation, and then we see him talking to the gods in a manner that is, to his own opinion, the most appropriate. He's even going that far. He's even going that far to say, I'm not gonna even give my god the opportunity to think that I'm second guessing. He says that the quote where he was interfacing with Hightower, where it was like, I'm not going to give the option for God to even see me consider myself losing, because I don't even want to give God the idea that I'm considering losing, because I don't even want the idea to go into his head. I think that it might be something that we figure out one day in human history, but I think that whenever you're in a society that hasn't figured out science and that is going to sleep every night without city lights blinding out the scale and the brightness and the overall geometric complexity and impossibleness of the sky, of the stars, you're going to have to think of some stuff to fill in the blanks between what I can do to anticipate what happens to me and what the universe is doing to me.
Ooh, yeah.
So I think that the gods are a way, whether or not they come into physical interplay in the story, I'm really excited to see if there's some kind of result with that. But either way, I think that the way that they are using them or not using them, the way that Vic anticipates pleasing them or not pleasing them, really just comes down to doing your best personal homework to set yourself up for the best level of success whenever you're doing your thing. So for Vic, I know that it's not as patient, and it might not give the best result, because I think that ultimately what it leads to is a little bit more confusion in the battlefield. I think that Barry has the upper hand as far as having a clear mind and the possibility of being most effective. But at the same time, he could get hit by an arrow. We don't
Yeah.
really know.
Yeah.
I still think that Vic's way of doing it is effective for him, but it also just I think it's a lot more shallow, and it
Yeah.
opens up possibilities for him to see something happen that's wrong and then to stop believing, and then he's going to fall apart in his own way because he's relying on it in such a strong way. Whereas Barristan is more so submitting at every step of the process. But I
Yeah.
think that if stuff goes right for Vic, I think that momentum could make him even more savage in moments where that savagery could give him the upper hand.
Yeah, because
Hard to
he
say.
wants to prove. Yeah, because if he thinks that his destructiveness, his aggressiveness is pleasing to R'hllor and the drowned
Yeah.
god, then he's gonna go full bore as much as
To
he
keep
can.
going. Well,
Espec-
think about the stuff
yeah.
that he's doing with Makoro
Yeah,
and getting the hand.
exactly. Like
He's so
What is all that?
dangerous on the way to. He's way more dangerous than he would have
He has
been
much
otherwise.
more momentum.
Oh, yeah.
Going into it.
Way more.
his confidence is off the charts right now. He like if we
Yeah.
think back to the Tarian chapter, he's like, with this horn, I can win the world. Like what? Like where did
Yeah.
that come from? What are you doing, man?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Like this guy.
but I think he thinks that kind of ambition is pleasing to the gods. Like they certainly to the values he was raised with. Yes, that is like he should be thinking that way. Whereas Barristan, his values are more like he worships like the god of chivalry in essence. Like those are his values. Where Victarion worships the god of depredations and raiding. You know, and all this other stuff of the powers that be are demanding. And imperious. Whereas,
And if he does really well after burning that ship full of those girls, then he's going to believe that savagery is being rewarded.
Yeah.
true, that's a dark thought, but I think you're completely right. Wow.
You know what I mean? Like if he does well, then who knows what he'll do after that?
Yeah,
It's
he's
just
like
gonna get worse.
it's just going to encourage him. You're totally right. Like success when you're that's the other side of this whole like true sincere belief in higher powers is when you surrender to that sort of fate to understand that destiny is what they say it is. If you believe that this is what they want, if you sincerely believe the gods want you to rain destruction down on your enemies and enslave your enemies, then woo, that's a scary mindset for your enemies to have, because you can't exactly talk them out of that.
Or burn your daughter if it works outside of Marine.
Yeah, out
of Winterfell.
Yeah, how do you rationalize that? How do you deal with that? How do you make friends with that? Like, I don't know that you can, and that's a big problem going on in Marine in general. Like, how do you? We've gone back and forth on this a lot. Like, you can't compromise with slavers because halfway between slavery and not slavery is some slavery, and that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you're not compromising. No, there shouldn't be a compromise here. It's not
right.
So good that you brought up Hightower here. I wonder about that. He's certainly someone that Barristan thinks about. He's certainly a important figure in his history, someone that he probably looked up to in moments like this, at least at some point in his life, even though I don't think Hightower was ever that much older than him, but he was certainly older than him. Still, when he was told that, it's possible Barristan hadn't even killed a man yet. He had fought tourney champion. He was a tourney champion, but it wasn't until after Summerhall that he killed Maelys the Monstrous, and maybe that was his first real war. And there's a difference between being a tourney champion and being a famous warrior, because well, one is you've proven yourself in battle, but I think more importantly, on the human level, one means you've killed, and the other means, well, it doesn't necessarily mean you haven't, but tourney champion does not imply killing. You wouldn't be surprised if a tourney champion has done some killing. But there's definitely cases.
They almost killed people.
Right, like when Rhaegar won that tournament at 17, he probably hadn't killed anyone yet, right? Like when would the prince had killed someone, like especially that prince, right? Maegor, sure, someone like that, yeah. But Rhaegar, I don't think so. And what is that? What do you think that means? Like in a world like this, like in our world, it's a big deal. I mean, we don't look at, well, not everybody does, but even like people who have to occasionally kill as part of their work, as part of their duty, like soldiers. Even that can be, people can look really down on that, even though it's sometimes it's a necessary part of life. But it really does kind of, someone who can't speak to it from experience, I feel like that would really change your mindset, maybe permanently, if you've ended someone else's life in combat, especially. Like maybe if you're a doctor or something like that, it's different, where it's, you're helping someone in their last moments. That's not what I mean. I mean, like, they would have been fine, if not for you, or something like that.
Right.
What do we think about that? Like, having the attitude that you have killed someone, like, that's because a lot of these people in this who are facing this battle, Barristan's knights, for example, the squires, they're our next topic. So this is our segue to them. None of them have ever killed anyone, as far as we know.
Right. It makes me think a lot about like the I kind of have two thoughts here, and the first is kind of that whole interface with death. I think that the characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, more so than like in our modern day society, have a much more intimate look at death, and I think that death is much more prevalent and apparent, and people see death all the time, whether it's the fighting pits or it's for survival out on the battlefield, or whether it's like their loved ones. And so I think that death is a little bit more of a intimate experience. But I think I was just kind of thinking about Theon a little bit and his experience with killing those kids that were meant to be Bran and Rickon, and how he kind of thinks back on that often, and kind of the guilt that he bears because it's these innocent people that he took out. And he didn't physically do it with his own hands, but it was like one of his first experiences ending someone's life for a purpose that was purely his own and nothing to do with those little kids. I think that
and someone he knew personally, right? That's a big deal too.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, and that's a really important detail. And so I have a bunch of jumbled thoughts, and maybe you can help me pull them together. But I just think that
death.
There is a lot of opportunity to see death in this world. This
like even like animals, right? Like even in our lives, like most of us, if we don't live on a farm, most of us don't even see the animals killed before we eat them, and like that.
No, we don't.
Right? Like that's like these
or even
folk
like our
in Westeros.
Pets, you take them, yeah. Exactly.
That's
so
true.
I think it's a little bit more of their job to see it this way, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's an easy thing to do. But I think that's kind of what Barristan was getting at in his speech when he was talking about love them if you can. This is a sacred I would infer that this is more of like a sacred duty of, we're not going to dehumanize the enemy simply because we're going to chop them down. I think that this is more of like, and I don't want to call it a privilege, because it's not a privilege at all, but I think that they have this more intimate, sacred view of what they're doing versus somebody like Victarion, who does it for sport. Barristan has that as a member of the King's Guard, like, this is my duty, and this is my opportunity, and this is my, like, I think he sees that as very sacred is the only word that I can really think of right now. And so as he's trying to teach his little youngins and younglings that, this is something that you're going to be doing, have the right mindset about it. Otherwise, you're going to turn into a killer, Yeah,
I think that systematically, organizationally, that Vic has to survive in a place like the Iron Islands. So his relationship with the things that they do, I think, is part of how he's coping with all the savagery that takes place from living there, and the way they have their class system, and the way that thralls are treated necessarily. But I think it's all sort of leading to the same thing, whereas Barry has his style of doing it. He's on one end of piety, and then Vic's on the other end of abject savagery. And then we have people in Essos that do it in their own way. I think that even in the context of a time period that's stylistically adapted here, that sees simple infections or broken bones, or like what happened to Lamy, lead to death so quickly. I think that even then, putting myself in the shoes of one of his trainees, having to go into this fight and swing my sword and kill someone, not just one time, but as much as I can, so I stay alive, is a really scary thought.
Yeah.
And that once you do it one time, I feel like it would get a lot easier. And part of me feels like it might become kind of satisfying, which is pretty scary too.
Yeah, like Sandor Clegane says that. Yeah, and he kind of laughs at it, but you can tell that that's just how he deals with it. I think on some levels he's not actually happy that he killed all those people.
Right, exactly. But I feel like there's a part of you as an animal in that scenario, when you're trying to protect yourself and stay alive, that I think sort of like might naturally come in that place, and that Vic has really leaned into it in order to stay effective, and Barry is trying to give them advice to stay sort of like separated from that animalistic nature, so they can continue to be aware of their environment and to try to be as effective as possible from a mental standpoint, which I think that he believes will lead to greater success and better safety overall in the end, which I think is part of the reason why he insists that if they can find it in themselves to love the people that they're killing, to love them, because keeping a positive attitude, for better or for worse, within all of this, and something that you have to do even though it's so bad, might overall lead to a better conclusion in the end, even though you have to kill someone.
Yeah, that's really well said, and it goes back to what we were saying about staying inside your head versus trying to keep outside your head in a moment like this when your internal thoughts are threaten to overwhelm you. Yeah, if you give into that fear too much, if you like embrace it in the wrong way or go, the way Victarion is maybe telling his men to do it, that's again, I'm no expert on psychology, but that seems to me like a path that leads to you enjoying killing, or it's the wrong thing to get used to. Barristan's like, get used to the fear, give in to the fear, ride that wave, don't fight it. Where Victarion is saying, yes, embrace the killing, embrace that aspect of it, embrace that part. It's like
Palpatine.
Yeah. Embrace your hatred. So that's really well said, and it's super interesting with young people like this, what they're saying. We're not in their heads. Like, is it bravado? Are they really how are they actually gonna do when they get out on that battlefield? Okay, so here's a quote. Barristan's squires. This is pretty cool. There's a lot of symbolism and conflict work, and this is just a deep topic here. Tumco Lo carried the three-headed dragon banner of House Targaryen, red on black. Larrick the Lash bore the white forked standard of the Kingsguard, 7 silver swords encircling a golden crown. To the red lamb, Selmy had given a great silver-banded war horn to sound commands across the battlefield. His other boys remained at the Great Pyramid. So it's kind of like a 7 versus 3 aspect here. We got 7 silver swords, and there's these 3 squires. Barristan thinks about, here's a great take from Nina. Barristan brings up the white bull, that same reference we had a minute ago. Hightower saying, don't speak of defeat before battle, but specifically, strategy-wise, he says it's folly to attack a large force when you have walls guarding you. But of course, that's a little bit of irony because Gerald Hightower died in that same 7 versus 3 fight at the Tower of Joy when he didn't stay inside the tower. He could have stayed in the tower and used the fortifications, but he and his 2 other Kingsguard came out to face a numerically superior foe. But Barristan doesn't know that. So that's a really good one. There's actually a lot of little references like that, little kind of hinty Easter egg type jokes, and this one will have a few more of them. More of that we have gathered towards the end of this episode. Now, Barristan also notes that it's the Hour of the Wolf, which is neat if we're thinking about 7 versus 3, Tower of Joy. Obviously think of Ned Stark, and we've already brought up Ned Stark, right? We already talked about the whole, fear is the only time a man can be brave is when he's afraid, and that theme gets a lot deeper here because we've already had a lot to connect Barristan and Ned. A ton. I'm sure you guys connected Barristan and Ned at least a few times when Barristan is trying to be Hand, he's fish out of water. Like it's sort of that again, but with some important differences. But my point here, Ned talks to Bran that way, his son. Now, Barristan thinks of these guys, these kids, these squires, as his sons. He's the closest he's ever going to have to sons. And here he is teaching them in a manner very similar to Ned Stark as they're going out into the world to face danger. Again, we have reason to think of Sandor. You might say, why would you put your sons in danger like this, leading them out into battle? Well, as Sandor would say, it's the world that's dangerous, not these decisions. Like Barristan Selmy didn't create the siege, didn't fling the corpses, didn't free the dragons. Like this is, he's the one trying to deal with it. So first take on these guys, we're going to talk about them individually, but as his relationship to them and all that, I'd like y'all to speak to this.
I think it's cool. I think that they're representative of different places in Essos or the surrounding SOC areas that in a way that satisfies me, and their different fighting styles I think it's what's necessary when you're in a place that has all these different kinds of pit fighters. And I don't know, did we get it confirmed whether or not he actually knighted them? I know they didn't.
Yeah, he did. It's confirmed them when he goes to meet the Archibald, And Garrus, after they've been captured, after they were arrested after the dragon taming incident, he mentions that he had knighted them.
Yeah.
Word. Yeah. Okay.
So it's one little side joke here. We don't know what Red Lamb's real name is. So it's like he's Sir Red Lamb. And that's an interesting little comparison, too, because like in the Victarion chapter, he doesn't bother to learn their names, right? He is like Bastard Boy, and I can't even remember the third one myself. The Brute, right, of course. But this is not this is not him not bothering to learn Red Lamb's name. That's just what that guy wants to be called. So this is it's a inversion. It's like one is a nickname that you've just given the guy because you don't know what to call him. One is his preferred nickname. Either way, we don't know his real name, but it's still one is a mark of respect, one is a mark of contempt. So anyway, please continue.
Well, I was just thinking too about when you're saying that, because he spends so much time thinking on whether or not he actually wants to knight them, because this is a little bit less of a traditional sense. I mean, they're not, there's no guys in this battle right now necessarily in like from our perspective for sure, but Barristan doesn't, if this doesn't go well for them, then he's thinking about how these newly knighted people will kind of be a little bit sullied by this experience because they were knighted by Barristan Selmy, who stage a coup essentially. And if things don't go well, then that's bad for them, because this sacred thing that he did for them, they will always be a little bit tainted by the fact that it was done by somebody like Barristan Selmy, who could be such a traitor in this experience.
Such a high standard for himself.
But then I think that like that, as he's thinking about them as his sons and the closest thing to sons he'll ever have, and just kind of the weight behind how he handles himself in this situation, how he's preparing them, and how he's thinking about knighting them, and how he finally does it, and how he rides into battle with these guys. I mean, I just, we've been talking a lot about just him and how he approaches the gravity of this situation with the true honor of a knight of the Kingsguard. And I think that that's something that we were talking about on our show a couple weeks ago. And it's like, can't you just like drop all of these trappings of power here? Like, we're in essentially the Wild West. Like, why do we have to be doing everything to a T? Can't we just like let go of all of these honorifics and just fight? And Barristan holds all of these things very down to these people that he's with and what he's wearing and all those different kinds of things. And I think that it's cool to get all of this from his perspective, because he is such a storied guy instead of somebody who's never been in a battle before, like Sansa hanging out on the Red Keep. We kind of get the power aspect of it too. And we don't get to see these guys, these new knights, we don't get to see their perspective. And so we don't know what they're thinking, but we can imagine. And Barristan having like this fatherly not love, but like a fatherly feelings toward them, I think is a nice little piece that we've got in this chapter.
At this point, I feel like if he is really thinking that they're as good as he's saying that they are in our points of view, then he's done a pretty good job on them. And I think the fact that he's done that with, like I said, this variety of human, with the variety of their fighting style, is very sweetly satisfying in the story for Barry, especially if he leaves us soon, because it's a great sort of last thing to leave onto the world and show how effective he is. As I feel like that's a great transition between someone who's a really powerful competitor, if they can be an equally powerful coach. And if you can coach people from Lazar, from a Giscari person, and someone from the Basilisk Isles all the same way at the same time in the same sort of module, that's really impressive. And as far as from a writing flourish, I think that it's just again satisfying that George gave us people that fight so differently than a typical sword, shield, dirk combo, and was basically able to make them a person worthy of being a Kingsguard in their own specific way. Like that's very he's fish out of water in Marine in the first place. So to continue those traditions far away from Westeros, it's very satisfying.
Yeah, well said. So specifically too, we've got Tumco Low, of course, Red Lamb, and Larrick the Lash, and like you said, they're each different, have different cultural, ethnic backgrounds, and we're gonna come back to that topic in a minute, because the unity of cultures is a big theme topic. It's a big connecting point between Dany and Jon's arcs as well, and for the ultimate humanity versus the world of the living versus the world of the dead, that's a huge theme for that. But sticking here, we have a lot of color work here that I find interesting. Tumco Low is carrying the Targaryen banner. It's black and red. He's a Basilisk Islander. He's sort of a Black Knight in a sense, not in personality, but in literal coloring. And he's compared to Jaime Lannister by Barristan. I wonder, and of course that's in context of his skill, but I wonder if there's more to it. I wonder if he's going to, I don't know, become a Kingslayer. He could maybe kill Hisdar or even Aegon, meaning young Griff. Somehow that seems.
You think it'll go that far?
Probably not, but it just occurred to me as an idea, and I wanted to throw that out there. Or maybe something more gruesome, like he loses his hand too. But I hope not.
Yeah.
He puts a whip there instead.
Yeah, then Larak, he's got Larak there to teach him how to do that, right? So, and Larak carries the Kingsguard banner, and he's Giscari, and the Red Lamb is Lazarine, and he carries the Warhorn. So it's kind of interesting that he's carrying the Warhorn. That's a parallel. We've got a dragon horn and this Warhorn, and Tyrion is sort of caught between them. That's something we talked about in the Tyrion episode. Are we supposed to think? Is anyone worried about the old line "lambs to the slaughter"? Are we worried about Red Lamb? I mean, these are dangerous jobs. Carrying the banners, that makes you a target. And I don't know. What do you guys think about these three? Like their odds of survival? Do you feel good about them? Do you think maybe they're temporary characters, maybe set up to cause us some tragedy, or maybe a little of both? Because there's three of them. Hard to say, huh?
Man. Yeah, honestly, I think we could safely say a little bit of both. I think that we also might be looking at them just perishing.
Yeah.
It really depends, I think, on Barristan's overall health, because I think that I don't know. It depends on how well he trained them, whether or not they're going to stick around with Dany.
Yeah.
All of this.
Yeah, like
if she comes back and if they're successful.
Their personalities, like it's their training, and will they maintain loyalty? Like, are they going to continue to respect this
That's
cause?
what I mean.
Like she freed them, so that's a lot.
Are they into those oaths? How much are they really into those oaths? As far as surviving through the battle, they have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. I hope that they survive long enough for the plans to be effective. But I mean, compared to other people's fighting skills, if they've been tutored by Barristan so well for so long, I feel like they have a better chance than anyone else. It's hard to say, though.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, because I think the overall attitude, we touched on this at the beginning of the show, your overall attitude toward Meereen, you might want to not memorize the names of Resnek, Moresnek, or Skahaz. You might want to feel differently about these characters versus people that we're meeting in Westeros, just because of the nature of it being at the end of Dance of Dragons, and you're carrying so much momentum trying to get to the story. The names are unfamiliar. It's hard to recognize compared to everyone else that we've been with for books. And so they might suffer the same fate. But at the same time, I think that maybe people might have felt that way about someone like Missandei at first, or Grey Worm at first, and look how important they are in the story. Or even someone like Strong Belwas,
Oh, yeah.
Hey, it's really hard to say. I hope that they survive, because I like how they're representing these different regions, not for the sake of them representing it, but because I think that it makes the story more rich because of it. And I want to know more about the Basilisk Isles. Like, I want more context with those people. And so if Tumco survives, then it's great for the story.
He could tell us some things. Yeah, just a little bit would be a lot. A little bit would be a lot.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think?
Not really much more to add other than I think there's going to be a lot of slaughter in this battle, and I think that we've got to lose a lot of people.
They're prime for it.
Well, yeah, like in order to make it legit, and as terrible as things are being set up to be, I think that we need to have some carnage. And I don't necessarily, like you say, there's some interesting guys, and I don't necessarily want to see them go, but let's just add people to the mix that will feel something for if they go. Yeah, and like make Barristan feel sad.
He's like, oh my God, my faith and everything of my preparation is going wrong. They're my sons, and they're getting cut down in front of me.
It's a little bit of a more pessimistic view, but I mean, a lot of stuff has got to go down. So
yeah. So let's expand this a little bit. We earlier talked about the Four Horsemen imagery and how that was such a big deal with the Astapor chapter and going forward, and how that's maintained, because those aspects, the famine, plague, war, and civil war, that's different variations on that. We have famine, plague, war and conquest, or civil war and war. There's different variations on that as we explored at the time. No need to rehash all that, but the point was there's a lot of these things were represented by different colors, and a lot of those same colors are present here. So I almost think this is like the Four Horsemen are turned around and back on those who unleashed them. It's like the Yunkish unleashed the Four Horsemen and the Astapori unleashed the four horsemen on Meereen and Dany and her folk, and they've turned it around on them because you got Barristan striking the first blow, riding a silver horse. Not only is he representing the Kingsguard color nicely with his white armor and his gold chasings and his silver horse, which is exactly the colors on the banner, but the first horse is supposed to be white/gray for conquest, and that's exactly what he's got. And then you've got things like the red horse is Civil War, which is the red lamb here, and he's at war. He's like angry at his own people. You've got the plague, is usually represented by green or white. Now, we've already brought up white, but they're all green boys. And that was like, oh, maybe there was no green until I thought of that one. And funny, because one of y'all said that phrase earlier in this episode, and until you said that, I was like, oh, there's the green. They're green boys. Yeah. and then, of course, the black is famine, as we've been over before, and with the black stone representing the cannibalism and all that. So there's a lot of thematic resonance here, even if we don't fully unpack it. I just want to draw your attention to it. And just show that George is just always doing this. Like, and wait till we get to some other stuff later in this episode. Nina got some figured out that all the places the different armies are standing is very resonant as well. That's going to be fun. So, any thoughts on the four horsemen imagery here, the karmic turnaround of that, or just anything you want to say about this symbolism and colors?
Y'all gonna lose because of it, because the karmic turnaround. And I'm glad that George is going for the big references in order to decorate these parts of the story. I mean, that's about as biblical as it gets.
Yeah, that is. Talk about it gets biblical. That's
the finale. That's the big finale.
Yeah,
that's what they say. Like, it's time to get biblical. Yeah, they're
biblical on Yunkai and all of the poor noblemen, and they're fighters that don't really feel that passionately about fighting for them. Don't you love that strategy? Just take out the boss module and they'll scatter.
Yeah,
fine.
That's a great segue, because we're going into some of these. We're going to have a section set aside for more direct mirroring and parallels. We've already obviously spoken to several parallels and mirroring techniques. These are ones that are a little more direct in that. We'll use that to jump off to some more discussions. Example: in Victarion's chapter, we have this line: "It will kill us too, then," said the boy. Victarion did not oft forgive a thrall for talking out of turn, but the boy was young, no more than 20, and soon to die besides. He let it pass. And here in this chapter, we have Gogor smashed a fist against his chest. Gogor not fall back, never. Then Gogor die, the old knight thought, soon. But this was not the time nor place for that argument. He let it pass. That same he let it pass, and this guy's going to die soon. So, yes. I don't have much to say about that other than to draw your attention to the structural. Yeah. Well, what George is doing, I think, is he's first of all, it's not just being clever. He's not just, I made these chapters so similar and snuck it past you. Like, that's just whatever. But it's cool, but you can't do a lot with it other than go, ooh, that's cool. That's not what he's doing, though. He's showing you, by having these structures so similarly, it really highlights the differences. We look at the similarity between Barristan and Victarion. We talked about that. We've also highlighted massive differences between them. And that's by having similar structures, it really highlights the similarities and differences, because the structure isn't something we have to parse. That part, at least, is settled. Any thoughts about that?
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's cool.
Word.
No, I think it's one of those things where I think it's just like drawing to the strength of George R. R. Martin's writing style. I think this is where I would usually put those things in, rather than necessarily inferring like what's going to happen next based off of that. But I think that like the strength of his writing style and just how intricate the story is, and how you can see it as surface level or as detailed as you'd like it to be.
Yeah.
I think I love that that's a such close point of seeing which style is more effective in its own way.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm right here offshore. I'm right here about to charge out from the portcullis. We're saying the same thing. It's like giving the same baseline decoration, like you said, to give the best, or to give us the same baseline so you can really see the differences. It's like putting something on a white sheet and then showing what it is. It can really stand out against it.
Yeah.
It's like, sort of the same idea there. And I don't know if one is more effective than the other. I know we've been talking about the different styles and like how they believe and how they prepare for action. Believe
Yeah.
that the good thing is more effective, but it's not always more effective. And I think that with the nature of the world is that all these other things are a part of the puzzle as well. It's not just how you prepare it or how you believe or how you think or how you feel. It's like the landscape in which you're entering at the same time.
Hmm.
So I don't really know what will shake out of this based on just these differences. But I think once we put in all the other details, that we can probably get close to an answer. And again, like I said before, I think that everything's kind of evenly matched, even though they're not evenly matched because of who's on what side and who's deciding what, and that the big like wild card in this is Danny and how the dragons will react to
Yeah,
all of it.
for sure. Another thing they have in common here, I like, is both Victarion and Barristan's plans have the same sort of kill as many slavers as you can and free the slaves. Like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, you can't really argue with that.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
yep, okay. That one's Victarion's like, okay, that part of your plan, yeah, go for it. That one we like. even we can find something to agree with Victarion on, you know. This one's not so funny, but it is parallel. Another parallel example. Another quote from Barristan is, "You may cry out for your mother, pray to gods you thought you had forgotten, howl obscenities that you never dreamed could pass your lips. All this has happened too." Well, the first line of Tyrion 2 is a dying man screaming for his mother. So, yeah, and that's an example of like ultimate like fear that takes you to a place that you never thought you'd go to. Like a lot of these people we've heard, like they're screaming out for their mothers, and they know we were sort of told or hinted at the fact that their mothers have probably been dead for decades, in some cases, yet this is still where their mind goes in their final moments, and it's just terrifying and something we cannot at all understand. Now, to lighten the mood after that, we had a catch from that same quote from, who was it that caught this one? This is a really good quote. Stefan B. From our Flick channel. The line, "You will hurl obscenities you never dreamed could pass your lips." We just quoted. Well, we saw that, didn't we not? With Asha and Middle Little, who called her the C word while fighting outside Deepwood Mott, and then apologized to her later, like sincerely. Like he didn't have to do that. It wouldn't have. She was a little surprised that he did. But that's a good example, almost certainly, of someone who he was surprised that those insults came from his lips and his battle lust or whatever. But that's actually really neat to think about that. Just the things you do. This speaks to our earlier subject of becoming someone you're not to do these awful things,
or who you really are.
Ooh, yeah, okay,
Right.
Good point. Very good point. Let's talk about that for a minute. What do you all have to say about that?
I feel like if you're getting pushed to the edge and enough stuff's happening that you haven't previously had to go to that place yet, if you do go to that place, you might say the C word.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The C word's in there somewhere deep. Hopefully that that's where it ends.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I can imagine that. I can imagine being, if I don't want to have to drop down my sword on something that's soft and fleshy and bony. I've never done that.
No.
You know, even when cutting meat and stuff, it's very controlled. It's way less exciting. And so the thought of doing that over and over again while protecting yourself and having that kind of a buzzing mentality around you, you can imagine someone like Barristan, especially if it smells like shit the whole time. You can really imagine someone like Barristan, even, like breaking down in some way, dropping some of the formalities, and honestly showing us the side of Barry that would make us most excited.
Yeah, for
Him
sure.
being fierce, because he is.
Yeah, it was like that
Kraz
little
was
moment
still
when he fought Kraz,
controlled.
when it's like Barristan the Bold.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
even then, that's just a little bit,
Yeah,
It's
that
just
was
a
a
little bit
taste.
of Barry. Like, what does he do?
Yeah.
Right.
What does he do?
Like thinks of himself as bold for once instead of
There
being
you
so hard
go.
on himself
There
as
you
he
go.
usually is.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah, everybody cited that line. It's one of the best, like, ooh, yeah, badass.
Yeah.
Well, it's like George is jumping out of the page and giving us what we want for a second. It's like
Yeah.
I hate to always go to Harry Potter, but it's like when everyone was looking up at Dumbledore in the pit of the Veil, and like everyone's scared, and then like and it's like, oh crap, like you're jumping out of the page and you're giving us sort of the thing that we wanted you to give us the whole time.
It's almost the fourth wall. It's not. It isn't, but you can
exactly.
It has that feel without actually technically doing it. Yeah,
and you can't do it too much. You know,
you
can't do too much. We're too sensitive for that. You got to just go around it a little bit.
Something else that I'm really surprised I missed, but luckily one of our commenters mentioned it. The flying corpses. Actually, a couple commenters mentioned it. The flying corpses, we have actually seen this before, and it's in a battle that we keep using to compare this to, Blackwater. We see all the antler men, right? They were they were flung by trebuchet. Of course, it was the other way around. They were flung from inside the walls, out of the walls. But it's still pretty similar, right? That's pretty cool. And Ashaya's writing Sweet Robin, Make the Bad Men Fly. That's a very similar concept too. Very good catch. That's really good. Yeah.
Or fall very far.
Yeah. Fly, fall. Yeah, it's kind of this starts to become similar when it's that high up in the air, right?
Yeah, true.
And speaking of being that high up in the air, good catch by Nina. Barristan riding Dany's silver reminds her a little of Alysanne's Silverwing. The names and coloring.
What transition is these?
Yeah.
Sorry.
And both were the exclusive mounts of Targaryen queens. Of course, until recently for Dany, who's now flown on Drogon, but still. And Alysanne's Silverwing didn't have a rider for a long time after her death, until the Dance of the Dragon. So that would have been like 40-some years or more. And the rider was Ulf the White, who had white hair, which is what Barristan has. And of course, Ulf and Barristan are not at all alike, but they do have this sort of color theme going on here. And also, the counterpart, Nina notes, to Dany's silver is Drogo's red, and kind of who's coppery chestnutty, really. The red is kind of a nickname. It's really more coppery. And that's kind of similar to Vermithor, who's bronze. And Vermithor's was Silverwing's sort of counterpart, because that was Jaehaerys' dragon. So that's pretty cool. Maybe a little history making its way in there, a little history repeating itself. I think that's probably intentional on George's part.
What do you think that could tell us about what could happen?
Ooh, well, if we take it to the fates of those characters, I mean, if we think of Alysanne, if Alysanne is supposed to represent Daenerys, then Daenerys will die with her work undone, which does seem like it might kind of happen, unless you think her work is to stop the Long Night, which that work will be done, I think. Or maybe just her dragon will survive after her and be around and be a part of the aftermath or part of the coda of the story, which is sort of what happened on the show. Like Drogon was still around, so that could be sort of the thing. Or it could be bad news for Barristan. It could presage his death, meaning if he's playing the role of Alysanne here, Silverwing survives the battle, and Alysanne does. Well, Alysanne didn't die in battle, but anyway, Silverwing outlasted Alysanne by a long time. So that could be, if the horse outlasts Barristan, we could be seeing a similar sort of thing. But I'm not sure. That's these aren't one-to-one connections.
You say that because Ulf the White was a traitor?
Oh, and that's a great point. Ulf the White switched sides, and there's this theory that Barristan might switch sides.
Shea coming in with a zinger.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, Ulf the White was a traitor. Now Barristan is arguably already a traitor, but whatever. That's the point. Is he could switch again. That theory has been out there. I know some of our contributors and commenters think there's no way that's happening because Barristan's just going to die before any of that could. But if not, this is a totally valid possibility, and yeah, that's where it could go if it doesn't end sooner than that for him. Any thoughts on all that, or should we move on to the next steps?
Well said. Well said.
All right, let's talk about the plan then. I'm less interested in the actual battle plan, more about the gathering and what this says about the Long Night and this parallel work we're trying to do with thinking about how this priest does groundwork for much bigger things, which is kind of hard to imagine. We're talking about how this battle is so monstrous and huge, but really it is a setup for bigger things, isn't it? I mean, the Long Night battles versus the dead, they're going to be bigger probably. Certainly more expansive, certainly larger scale in terms of it's not just going to be in Meereen, right? It's going to be lots of places in Westeros probably. Maybe there'll be some epic final thing at Winterfell, who knows? But anyway, let's talk about the unity. Let's talk about this coalition, because I think that's really interesting. Yes, and here in general, what they're going to do is ride out, attack the trebuchets, kill as many nobles as possible, free as many slaves as possible. We've been over that. There's not a whole lot more to say. But we do have one thing I want to jump in before we get to these parallels. Dario may get freed during all this. Dario represents a part of Dany that is real, somewhat troubling, somewhat natural, right? Like she just needs to have companionship, right? That's part of her relationship with him, but she's also set him aside. Do you have any thoughts on Dario's future? Does he have a role in the rest of the story, or no, or somewhere in between? He's someone I find difficult to predict because there's no chance whatsoever the show's ending for him is what we're getting in the books. So
right,
it's very hard to predict. So I understand if you don't have a strong prediction, because like I said, I don't really either. So, but if you just in case,
he goes, there's no chance that that's happening.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if I have a strong prediction, but I definitely don't think that he's gonna go to Westeros with Daenerys. I just think that he kind of represents this piece of her that needs to part of her as she goes on to leave. Just because I think that so many people talk about him being her almost like Achilles' heel, like somebody that she cares deeply about, who's not necessarily gonna help her situation in Westeros. And even in this chapter, we get Barristan kind of thinking about how if he died in this battle, it would kind of be helpful for everybody, because then they wouldn't have to deal with the Dario situation going forward. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily have a strong opinion about what that looks like, whether he stays behind in Marine on purpose, or he dies, or he goes off and balls out somewhere else and does his own thing. But I just don't think that he's going to be part of that group that heads over with Daenerys ultimately.
I feel like I think that Dario is bad for Daenerys for everyone else, but not necessarily bad for Daenerys. I think that especially after she comes back with Drogon, like she's going to have a lot more, and going through what she does mentally, I think she's going to have a lot more of a footing on who she is as a person. And if she chooses to have him around, I think it'll only be bad for people that are trying to bullshit her. Like he tells her very flatly what's going on. And he does offer some difficulty in how he chooses to disappear at times to sort of emotionally blackmail her to feel certain ways. But if she can put him in his place and not allow that sort of flexibility for him to get margins on top of her that way, the only bad thing that he really represents in that case is her potential to marry other people for political gain, which we saw happening with Hizdar. And we've already seen her like shove him off to the side for that. So if she needs to do something like that again, then he will be in the way for that. Yeah. But I think people getting in her ear and influencing her in ways that is not like straight up or up front. I think that that's really the biggest threat, because he basically tells her how it is when it comes to stuff. And that's dangerous for other people because they want to use her in different ways. And he's like, listen, you don't need to do that, or this is actually what they want. And it's kind of like, I think the way Tyrion will treat her in some ways, but I think ultimately Tyrion still has his own agenda.
Yeah, but you don't think Dario has his own agenda? Because we don't know for sure. I mean, I think that we speculate a lot that like Dario is with her because he loves her, but he's also likely with her because he loves the trappings of power. Sure. And he loves the access that it gets him. We don't I wouldn't say that he's purely motivated in his dealings with
I don't think that he's purely motivated at all, but I think that she's the biggest babe around. I think that that's his goal.
It is hard to separate the two. Like, she is a big babe around, but she's also the mother of dragons. Like, you can't separate the two, I guess.
Yeah,
it's hard to say. Yeah.
You can't, but she's a mega babe, and he likes mega babes, you know? So it's like, you take her out of the equation, what's he going to do? He's constantly going to be trying to find someone as good as her.
On to the next.
Yeah.
Maybe it's on to the next. Yeah. And that's maybe that's fine for Dario, and maybe that's fine for Dany, but I think that the real threat that he posed in Dance was getting in the way of potential political alliances, not necessarily like hurting the kingdom. I don't think that, I don't know, maybe I'll need to reread it, but I just don't see her, especially after going through what she's going through, being too distracted by him hanging out in her bedroom to be effective in Westeros necessarily.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. That's a good take. I like that, because I think a lot of us do just kind of go, Dario, he's not going to be part of the story going forward. But you're right about the fact that he does tell her.
She put him in his place.
Yeah, he does tell her things that she needs to hear that other people won't tell her. That's a good point. Like, he's not, and Hannah's right that it isn't necessarily for her benefit. He's not necessarily saying that just out of sympathy.
She knows that, though. She knows that about him. He wears the girls on his daggers. He's not exactly hiding it.
It's like she knows Jorah. She knows what Jorah was after, and she was able to still use him until, other than finding out he had betrayed her in the past. But if it wasn't for the betrayal in the past that upset her so much, justifiably, she could continue just using him as a sword and being like, yeah, he's in love with me and I'll make use of that. I don't love him and he knows I'm never going to love him. Well, maybe he doesn't know that, but he's been told that. he may have in the back of his head that can change, but he's wrong. But anyway, so she has dealt with this before, like someone who's wants her and doesn't necessarily have good good ambitions with that. Like she's not into that. So anyway, that's well said.
What do you think?
It is sort of underestimating her to say she can't handle it in a way, or maybe because she does seem to handle it all right. Like inside her head,
she
she's
can't
not
handle
fooled.
it. Who can?
She's not fooled, right? Like she's in her head. She's like, Dario is war and woe. Like she's got the hots for him, but she's not listening to his like strategies. She's not like he suggested red wedding the Hizdar's wedding, to her,
right?
And she's like, no, she's not fool. She wasn't like, she didn't even consider it for a second, She's like, no, that's monstrous. Like, no way I'm doing that.
But don't you also see like him as part of Daenerys's learning process of becoming? I kind of think of like that kill the boy and become the man situation. And
her relationship with him is kind of killing the boy. Yeah, she's the girl in this case. Yeah.
And he represents this like feminine and womanly side of her that we don't get to see often in her ruling because she can't. We don't explore that a lot, and so I feel like she has to kill the parts of her that are real.
Why?
Maybe. I don't know. I think that's what George R. R. Martin. I think that he kind of makes that argument oftentimes in the series that you kind of have to get rid of the things. Your like personal things for the greater good or whatever.
It's that Barry chapter that we just did. I forget what it was called. Barry chapter that we did. The one before Queen's Hand. I forget what it's called.
I don't know.
Well, Shay, look it up real quick.
There's the Soiled Knight.
Does it matter?
The Soiled Knight is ours. Yeah.
Either way, it's the one you're scrolling. Hurry.
I'm not gonna find it fast
Either
enough,
way,
so
Dragon Tamer. Nope, that's the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, Kingbreaker. Boom.
Okay, Kingbreaker.
He thinks a lot about stuff, and that's the chapter. No, he's sort of giving the ideas, and he's providing multiple examples of how effective leadership or control are kind of ultimately tarnished by love becoming a part of the scenario. And then he follows that up with, I think, kind of being a huge hypocrite, because that's part of the reason why he is who he is as a person, is his love for, I forget what I wrote in my notes. It was a lot more eloquent than what I'm about to say, but it was basically with the way that he is, how he believes chivalry is the answer to all the solutions and the problems that he's getting himself into, is basically the same idea of love in general, of like of this sort of magic coming in the way of logic. And he's like ultimately still depending on this level of magic that can give a potential variable that might lead to failure. And he's citing all these examples where love has become this potential variable, especially with the Targaryens and pretty much every other situation in the story, leading to some kind of failure. And I think that what you're saying is as well as that her killing the boy essentially is taking out killing her womanly side or her feminine side, or where she's being distracted by things like this, is going to create a more effective person that's a leader of all these people. And maybe you need to be a computer program to lead all of these people. You need to be totally perfect and not shy away. It was Ashara, I think is what it was with Barry. But ultimately, Barry had the hots for Ashara in a very deep way. And I would argue that maybe not pursuing that in some way might have led to more trouble than what ended up happening to her in the first place. We don't really know.
Yeah, it is hard to
I don't know what the answer is. I think that that's part of what A Song of Ice and Fire is going to ultimately be. But just from intuition, not knowing what he's older than me, smarter than me, pays a lot more attention than I do to stuff for sure. So maybe he thinks he has the answer. Maybe he's going to get to it eventually at the end of the story. But just knowing what I know about Dany, based on just the kind of person she's been in all of these books so far, I would put her I'd say she's as good as equipped as anyone. Maybe Bloodraven is pretty good at it too. I don't know. But like, I think that she's in a great position to master herself and still get what she wants.
Yeah.
And not mess stuff up.
Right on.
Is all I'm saying.
Right on. Okay, well let's move on to this big topic here, important topic. How this coalition, this army that's gathered in Daenerys' name, that is mostly there because she organized it ahead of time. A lot of these are slaves that she freed. A lot of them are people following her because she's so impressive, because she's a mega babe. No, because she's the mother of dragons. And here's a quote that we've seen this style quote many times, and it pretty much always seems to say the same thing. Quote, now once again the market was a scene of carnage, though these dead came riding the pale mare. By day, Meereen's brick streets showed 100 hues, but night turned them into patchworks of black and white and gray. We've seen this like I said, we've seen this kind of sort of expression before from George when he talks about the bright banners and all the individuality, the houses, the identities, and all those identities fade when night comes. It comes black and white and gray, and that's when the distinction between humanity and individual personality starts to fade, when we're faced with the long night and it becomes survival. And we don't have as much, there's not as much individualism, there's not as much unique identities. It's all about just the human race and surviving. A couple other parallels here. You have the others versus the slavers, right? This is an inversion. The others are obviously bad guys, and full stop. Slavers, same. We talked about how when the slave, or you free a slave, you maybe have added a new soldier to your side, because they absolutely will want to kill, quite possibly, maybe they just want to run away, but a lot of them will want to go back at the ones who enslaved them in the first place. Not hard to see why. Similarly, from the others, this is an inversion because it's the bad guys get it this time. The others, when they kill a living being, they create a new soldier by raising them and making them into a white. So we have this sort of parallel inversion of the power of adding to their army comes through something innate to them, whether it's you're fighting against evil or whether you've been subsumed by that evil. And it's a very different look than A Song of Ice and Fire's core in a lot of ways, because we're constantly given gray situations where it's not necessarily clear who the good guys are. There's not necessarily good guys. It's not really the same here. This is like in the Blackwater, you have people rooting for Stannis. You got people rooting for Tyrion. You got people maybe not rooting for Tywin, but maybe rooting for certain things to not happen around Tywin, right, and certain people adjacent to him. Similarly here, or not similarly here, no one at all that I know of is rooting for Yunkai here. So it's completely the opposite. Likewise, no one's going to root for the others. So I think that's why this
anyone in the fandom that root.
Yeah, I've never
at all. Do we know that?
I've never heard of such a thing. There's got to be one.
There's people at the Great Tourney at Ice and Fire Con that wear a Frey costume. And you know, there's got to be someone repping Yunkai. There's got to be.
We're starting it right now. People are like, "Oh yeah, it could be the first band."
What an idea! Exactly. That's so funny.
So I want to draw your attention to all that. Do you guys have any comments on these like big overarching, like large scale parallels to the slavers and the others and humanity and fighting against the very few things in the world that we can definitively say are wrong? There's always opinions on almost anything you can say. There's a different attitude, might mean this is not such a bad thing, but some things I think we can say definitely wrong. And I think that's where we're at with this. What do you guys think?
I think that the fighting the others might be an easier sell for just like the world as a whole, because I think that while there really isn't much nuance between what's happening in Meereen and kind of as you're explaining who's on the quote unquote good side or the bad side, I feel like there's more power to be gained from the Yunkai and kind of what they're looking to do and what they're looking to accomplish. There's like a lot of money and power and things there that I think people are holding on to over morality. But when you look at the others, there really isn't going on to their side. Like that's very much a fight for your planet as you know it. And so I think that there's going to be even less of a question once everybody's actually on board. I think there's even less of a question of kind of where do I stand or who should I fight for or what position do I want to be part of, because the gravity of that situation is even more black and white. Either you help and we might be able to push these guys out, or you don't and we all get turned into dead things. So
There's no
it's just like
compromise with
another
them
stepping
either.
stone.
Yeah.
Right. It's another stepping stone kind of towards that grander battle. But one other thing I was kind of thinking about is I think that the people of Westeros, and as we look at this fight against the others, are a little bit more united just in general. While here in Meereen, we really have every different possible background, and we haven't quite gotten to the point of Westeros where there's as much of a melting pot. I think of uh, like backgrounds, but here we've got all of the religions and a lot of the different cities and areas and countries and whatever you would call them represented in so many different ways,
More
and
coming.
Yeah,
even with more on the way.
Even Westeros, right? You've even got Ironborn and Westermen and
right, exactly.
sellswords. Yeah, it's
the
incredible.
side of the coast of Westeros. Yeah.
So it's even more of kind of this melting pot of interest converging here. Whereas I think that when we're fighting in Westeros against the undead, I mean, obviously we're going to need everybody to participate in order to have any sort of chance against them. But I feel like it's even a larger hurdle here in Meereen to get people on your side, just because there's so many different backgrounds and perspectives, and morality comes into play a little bit.
Before you answer, Zach,
let
me add another little tweak to the discussion here and throw out the aspect that what might happen in Westeros, something we saw from the TV show, which I think is a good chance of being on a large scale accurate. Not the details necessarily, but the idea is that while some of Westeros is struggling to stop the others, there will still be factions just going about their business as if there is no such problem. They're still going to be fighting over the throne. What we saw with Cersei in the show, that could be, we might get that in the books, where it may not be Cersei, although she's a strong candidate. We may still see squabbling over the Iron Throne, even as the others have broken through the wall and all that. Right. And that could be where we have this sort of parallel between, well, are we really all united, or like the ones who are the ones who do go north are going to be all in and fighting for humanity, but there's still going to be some who are just like, nah, I'm not going to help. I got my own things to do.
That's going to piss us off more than anything to see that happen, which is why I think it's going to happen probably in some way.
And this is something that really, maybe I'm getting a little too real with this, but when we have like a whole global situation that we all are dealing with, it's kind of like, it does kind of suck to see people like going the opposite way, doing not helping or whatever, even when helping doesn't require
advantage
much
of the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So
for very small gains that don't actually relate to the greater goal of everyone, which makes sense, because in moments of opportunity, that's a good time to get those small gains. But I would argue that when the others are coming, I mean, think of what's going on inside of Meereen right now that we don't know about.
Yeah,
at this
and all that. Yeah,
exactly. Not only Skahaz, but just locally on the ground of not just Harpy related activity, just the kind of thieving and taking of other people's resources when you haven't earned them. That's probably going on.
Yeah, lack of central
in general.
authority.
Yeah,
uncertainty.
Yeah, what happened in King's Landing when what happened to the High Septon? Those opportunities to lash out, or lashing out. I think manifests in a lot of different ways. I think that what you were both just talking about is going to be part of the overhead analysis that happens way down the line whenever we're looking at the greater themes of the books whenever they're published, and we're going to see like the artist and how he expressed his theme in an even more abstract way than being upfront about burning someone with fire or freezing someone with ice, of what's happening here being like you were saying, the lifelike elements. This is dealing with someone's freedom from other people and ability to live their lives freely from other people, is the representative of the life and the potential of what you could do with your life, being the fire elements, and then the survival that we're going to deal with the White Walkers, with the others being the cold dead ice element. That's a lot more serious, that has less abstraction, less potential, more just to do with not being taken over and being controlled like a puppet, like a zombie.
Yeah, well, there's this,
it's cool.
Let me touch on this Azor Ahai aspect of this all too, because something that as Shay and I have been beating the drum about for a long time. We're not the only ones, but certainly it's something that we've really tried to highlight, is how the legend of Azor Ahai is more about a figure who is a uniter, a coalition builder, rather than a warrior, right? Like there is some warrior talk in there, but mostly it's about bringing together cultures, bringing together all these different peoples that don't have much in common for some common goal. And we're also very open to the idea of Azor Ahai being multiple figures. Even though Dany checks off the boxes better than Jon, this box they check off pretty well equally. Jon is doing a whole lot of uniting too, right? He's bringing together free folk of disparate types. Let's not forget the free folk themselves are not one monolithic organization. Mance Rayder had a hell of a time bringing them together. And only through strength and charisma and intelligence was he able to do that, and time. So we see the same thing happening there. Jon's coalition is falling apart because chaos and inexperience and people not getting it. And we're seeing some of that here. Now, Dany's this is a more disparate group of people brought together in the Slaver's Bay. But it's still a similar concept of people who don't really get along, that need to get along, or they're all going to die. That's kind of the basics there. Do you have anything to add to that? Whoa, what's that?
I think it's a pretty good summation of what we've been talking about.
Sorry about the background noise.
That's okay.
Bye. No, that's a good summation of kind of what we've been saying.
Yeah.
Right on. Okay, well let's move on to a related topic that's very similar. We talk about.
Can I ask really quick?
Oh yeah, sure.
What do you think the significance is of us getting the fire before the ice?
Maybe because that's the tool that, like, the fire is more associated with what we need to fight the ice. I think, like, we're not. Boom. You know what I mean? Like the ice is the enemy. The fire is destructive and it can harm us.
It's life.
But we are able to. Yeah, it is life. Fire is life. Fire is destructive, but you need it to live. Ice, you don't really need ice to live.
Well, if you enjoy beverages as much as I do, it might seem crucial.
That's a good point. I do like cold beverages.
Yes, you do.
So let's talk about some exceptions to Barristan's speech and how this builds into this uniting of themes. Like, everyone feels fear, he says. But if you were to glance over at the Unsullied, it wouldn't be the same exact case, would it? They feel fear. Maybe it's not clear. They have this whine of courage. It's really kind of I don't want to say tortured out of them, but it's pretty close to tortured out of them. We don't actually know what they're feeling, but they certainly act like they're not afraid, and you get the sense that it's not like an act. It's not like Barristan isn't acting unafraid. He really is unafraid, but he is feeling stuff. He's dealing with it. Whereas the Unsullied, you get the sense that they've just had a lot of emotion drilled out of them, fear and love, but clearly some of it's still there because we see them have relationships and they still act. They still are human. They've just had a lot of that humanity taken away from them. Building on that, the Unsullied show great courage in facing the flying dead. But what about the walking dead? Like, they just move out of the way when a body flies. They just break ranks, the body lands, and they just, reform their position like nothing happened. So talk about an enemy that feels no fear at all. The Unsullied may be the best example of humans that can master it because of these artificial means. But what about when we face actual dead that don't feel any fear, that don't feel pain? That's something else the Unsullied feel less of is fear and is pain, rather. And so that kind of makes them sort of a bridge between the undead and the living. More living than not, obviously. But that's a really neat kind of concept, that fear and pain you take those away and they're not good things. We don't like fear. We don't like pain. But if you take them away, we're not human, are we?
Yeah, it's like we were saying before with bravery, the concept of acting within a moment that you don't really know what to do. I don't think that it's possible for you to do that without fear. So it's almost like a chicken and the egg. It's like they have to be present for you to exist in this world in some way, to do something that you haven't done before.
Yeah. And if you don't understand fear, you won't be able to. If you don't feel fear, you can't really sympathize or understand how it works in other people, which is most people. That's really interesting. Yeah, I'm very curious to see how the Unsullied will face the undead. I think they're set to be frontline warriors, very much like they were in the show, but I think we'll get more nuance to it. Do y'all have any other predictions or ideas for how the Unsullied will And this aspect of fearlessness or faux fearlessness will play out the rest of the way. It's super interesting to me, but I'm not sure there's a lot to say about it other than waiting on George's imagination. But maybe I'm wrong. What do you guys think?
Well, I think that one thing that is going to make me freak out when we're in that battle is if the Unsullied start to lose their cool and they start to crack it all. I think that that's going to be a moment where we have to say, okay, this is going to be absolutely insane. And so maybe that's something to watch for. If they can keep a level head, is it even keeping a level head just because it's so ingrained in them? I'm not sure. But if they can, the way we see in this chapter when they're just stepping aside a little bit for a moment when the bodies are being flung, then I think we've got a good chance. But if they start to fall apart, I don't know about the rest of us.
That's a great
that makes
idea.
us feel good. Side and then immediately fill ranks back again. Is that what your main concern is when you're thinking about how they might react? Is if they, like Hannah said, if they react in a way that shows that they are also shaken? If someone has gone through as much conditioning as them could be shaken by the undead, then it's like, oh, they must be a lot worse than I could have imagined.
That's great, yeah, because this is really touches back to what we said at the beginning of this chapter, the beginning of this discussion, is when we said Barristan's confidence is infectious. He's showing everyone else, like, look, I've been through this before. I am afraid, but I'm handling it, right? It's totally what makes it work. He's selling that to his men. He's sharing his confidence that way. But yeah, and the Unsullied are like the two. If the Unsullied can't handle it, oh man, yeah, that's terrible. If they break, ooh.
Then what's Theon gonna do?
Wow, yeah, that is a great take there. If the Unsullied break, oh man, yeah, who can stand if they can't? Wow.
I don't know. They'd have to have some really bold, heroic like ideas for their future. Like I don't know. I can see Jon being headstrong enough to try to break through a bunch of ice, but he's one person,
and he could be considered partly dead. So maybe that's a part of what gives him that. He's like, hey, I'm already dead. I can handle this.
It's like Vic in this sense, honestly.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thematic connections from where the armies are standing that I mentioned earlier. This is Nina's work here. Really good job here. She mentions that the Unsullied are positioned, quote, beneath the towering brick facade of Marine's ancient slave exchange, which is a slave market, right? And that's exactly where she bought them in the first place, although, of course, it was Astapor, not Marine, but that is where they originated. So when the corpses come down, the Unsullied show their unemotional, disciplined response. They just step away, then move back. And it's not inhumane, it's high discipline, but we just spoke to that anyway. Then the Stormcrows assemble beneath the Merchant's Arcade, fronting on the southern side of the square. The Merchant's Arcade. Sell swords, purchase the swords, right? Merchant's Arcade. That fits super well. They're there. It's like you go to the market and buy yourself some fighters, and that's where they're standing. And this is where I need to point out, this is where Quentin and his men joined the Windblown in the equivalent spot at Volantis, near the Merchant's House. So Merchant's Arcade, Merchant's House, similar thing. And that's where we would expect them to be standing. The Dothraki riders are, quote, milling about near the weathered bronze statue of the Chainmaker. Now, we don't know who the Chainmaker is. Some of you will ask, who's the Chainmaker? It's some sort of god or heroic figure, heroic in air quotes, from the Giscari pantheon or legendarium. But this is certainly an association with slavery. We can be pretty 99% sure of that. And the Dothraki are some of the biggest enslavers in the world, right? They capture, especially in this area, this part of the world, they go out, they capture people, they bring them to these markets and sell them. So it kind of makes sense that they're thematically hanging out by the Chainmaker, the guy who sort of enables, in a lot of ways, their lifestyle. They go, they sell their slaves, they get money, they go back and do that again. Now, you all mentioned Skahaz as someone to be wary of. We are on that same level of wariness. We've compared him to Littlefinger in a few ways. He doesn't have, his ambitions aren't as dark or as selfish as Littlefinger's, but they're his ability to manipulate people and to blame other people for his things that he probably did is on par in terms of his skill level. And Nina points out he's not there. This is as a footnote to where all these people are. He's not. So what do y'all? Let's talk about that briefly. It's one of our last topics here. What do y'all think about Skahaz, his lack of being here, and any sort of maybe predictions or worries you have about what he might do or not do?
He's just, to me, he's been so eager this whole time with Barry, and we also compared, I think, both him and Resnick as a sort of a Varys and Littlefinger dynamic equivalent there in Marine, and I think that I don't see why he would care so much about Barry's opinion. But although there has been times along the process with Barry where it seems like he's listened to him and he heavily disagreed with him, and I can't decode whether or not he's continuing to listen because he's submitting in some way or if he's biding his time. It's hard for me to tell, and he hasn't really revealed whether or not how much he believes in Danny's course, like how deeply it resonates with him. But up until this point, someone like Barristan believes, for the most part, that it's because he's so against from the beginning the idea of slavery within Marine, and so they're just stalwartly against it. And maybe he's thinking about it and it's not coming on the page, or maybe he's thought about in other situations that before he had his POV, that he also had something that was in it for him in some way. At least he's at the top of that pile in some way, and he's able to derive some power. They're able to derive some margins of influence within Marine by there just being a new rule, and that new rule being that there isn't necessarily slavery allowed. So if he's going against the old way, in a way that Resnick and the Lorax and people like them have cascaded on top of power comfortably for the longest time, like I think that he's probably got some sort of a chip on his shoulder about those people, because they've basically held him down and his family down, I think, for a long time within Marine. The Kandaks versus the Resnacks or the Lorax or whatever, and like this is a good opportunity for him to seize power in some way. So if he's seizing power, chaos is a ladder.
Yes.
If he's got power enough right now with Barristan, then maybe he won't try anything. But I think a lot of it has to do with how well they're doing outside of the battle, and how well things fall apart or not, like how handily the victory is on their side. I think that he might still use the Brazen Beasts to control the inside of Marine. To what end? I'm not sure. Like, hopefully he holds it strong enough for them just to want to leave. And I think he knows enough about their potential conquest toward the west that he might just do that. Or if he'll use it as a way to sort of set him up as the person that they leave in charge, because he has control of the City Watch, essentially, like the equivalent of that. I think that that's also a pretty good option. But I think a lot of it just comes down to how well they win in the end. And I don't really think that there's a way that he's a saint-like figure that that doesn't have grander machinations for this, unfortunately.
Well said. Well, Hannah, what do you think? But also, before you answer, let me throw in a little detail that I think a few people may have missed. I want to make sure everyone's aware of it. Yes, I agree there's a lot of danger if Skahaz be kind of left alone inside. But something to keep in mind is not nearly the full Unsullied are deployed out. Now, there's about 8,000 Unsullied, and only 5,000 of them are going out. So the other 3,000 aren't really mentioned. There's no way that many have died so far. I don't think. Maybe even 1,000. I think dying at this point would be a little surprising. We certainly haven't heard of that many dead Unsullied. So they're presumably still inside, and that would be a big issue for Skahaz to have to deal with if he decides he wants to seize the city.
Right.
But that wouldn't stop him from like killing the hostages, for example. That's a popular theory that we must consider. So yeah, Hannah, what do you think?
I mean, I don't have too much more to add to that other than what I was saying about chaos is a ladder. Like, I just think that Skahaz is seizing opportunity where he sees opportunity to get his own, and that I don't necessarily think he has strong loyalty ties to Daenerys and Daenerys' cause. He's just kind of playing the game the best way that he knows how, and is manipulating the situation in his favor the best way he understands how to manipulate the situation. And so I think that leaving him, and I think, is absolutely something worth noting. What he ends up doing specifically, I can't necessarily, like, I don't have any specific thoughts on that, but definitely agree that, like, that's something worth noting.
He kind of you think that he'll, because he's just dislikes, or will he at all? But like, why would he? Is it because he wants to make more chaos, so there's more potential for growth, or is it because he really has a bone to pick with the other side?
Well, I think so much he believes it's essentially like a fight to the death. There can only be one winning side here, and if the nobility is allowed to regain their position of power, he's dead. He and his family are dead, and he knows that. So he's like, whatever. So if his allies do things that don't put him in a position to survive all this, he's going to turn on them because it means his death, which is somewhat understandable. Maybe not the most noble thing, but at least it's like you can predict based on that. He's not going to let himself die. If we could add to that, if we could do more comparing to Littlefinger and us, like Littlefinger is manipulating grain prices. We see that from Elaine's chapter in the Vale, which we'll cover in a few weeks. And that's exactly the kind of undermining of a human coalition that's necessary to stick together to fight this encroaching darkness. Exactly the kind of person that can undermine all that. And Skahaz kind of represents that as well. It's like they have this uneasy coalition in Meereen that's fighting the Yunkish, and it could all collapse if the parts of that coalition cease to trust each other. And if that central piece of the coalition includes the Skahaz guy that the other people can't trust, they're like, well, we're not going to ally with him. We like Dany, but not if she's with this guy, and it all falls apart. It's very fragile. And someone like you said, Littlefinger, Skahaz, they're experts at taking advantage of that uncertainty. Chaos is a ladder, It's
as cliche as that is.
It fits awfully well.
Yeah.
Okay, Hannah, sticking with you. Joe Buckley is excited to see the Unsullied in action. Nina is very confident in her prediction that Barristan won't survive Meereen. And I'm personally just really perversely curious about what Victarion's firearm is going to do in action and what it means. What about y'all? Hannah, starting with you, what are you most looking forward to from the rest of this battle and or aftermath? It's like, what's something you're really curious about that, like, it's near the top of your list other than the horn? Because I'm also going to ask y'all what happens with the horn.
Right.
So
let's take that off the table.
Yeah, we'll do that one next.
My answer is not necessarily a good one. I'm excited for it to be over. Not because I don't want to see what happens, and not because I'm not interested in all those things you listed off, because I think that this is going to be, pretty epic. But I'm just really excited to move past this hump that we've been swirling in for so long. and it's called that for a reason. And I'm excited to kind of see the fallout of that and kind of what happens next and the trajectory that Daenerys' storyline is going to take, where they go next, who's with her, and how long it takes until we get to Westeros in Winds of Winter, whether we make that journey in that book or we have to wait for A Dream of Spring to kind of reach back home. So that's kind of a lame answer, but I'm excited to see the aftermath of the chaos of the battle and kind of what that means for these characters that we really care about.
I don't think that's lame. I think that's pretty valid. After all, Meereen's not like, we'd rather have a Meereen's weave or, something like that.
That would be a worse Twitter handle for Ash.
Yeah. Yep. I just unintentionally insulted Ashea. My bad. What about you, Zach? What are you looking forward to, either in the battle or just after, or anything like that? Something like, it could be the small detail, it could be a big one.
Looking forward to Barristan and Vic fighting back to back, and he's like, "You're Barristan," and he's like, "You're Victarion. What's up with your hand?
What's up with your face?"
Yeah, why is your face so old? You're the only person older than you in this story is Brynden Rivers. And he's like, "You mean Bloodraven?" And they're like, "Wow, we bond over history."
I think my brother had a dream about him once.
Oh, that's funny.
That was pretty good.
I just
Zach is Shea she said you're going to be the one to finish the series, to be the one to write the rest of
it. Fine, let's do it. Let's do it. I'm going to need some help. I'll just put down bullet points.
So then the next one. What about the horn? We'll stay with you, Zach. Do you have any predictions or hopes for the Hellhorn?
I hope that it's real.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't suck.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I would like to see Vic blow it and it work, but I'm not sure. I want to know if what Makoro did to him makes him more makes it possible for him to use it, because I feel like there had to be a use for it to be made. And I
Yeah.
think understanding the horns is a key to understanding some next parts of the story, because clearly there's some kind of like ancient knowledge that no one that we've really talked to intimately like understands intimately. Maybe
Yeah.
if we had a Blood Raven point of view, we would know. Um,
I wonder if it's
someone
the no man part, like a woman could maybe blow it or something like that.
No, that might be something too. I mean, either way,
Yeah.
there's I think understanding how the horns work. Clearly, they were constructed in multiple parts of the world. Maybe I don't know if that's clear, but like they're definitely in different parts of the world now, and it seems like there's importance for them that spans multiple instances. Maybe again, we don't really know. I can't say for sure. I mean, I know what the glyphs supposedly said.
Yeah.
Said that I don't know what they actually do.
Right.
So
He may have
understanding
lied.
them,
Yeah. Makoro
he could have
says.
lied, but even then, it could be some kind of a storied imagery. It might not have like it might not literally tame a dragon. It might just be a horn like in a frequency that they really like or something. I don't know specifically.
It's so
I
weird.
really want to understand it. But if it's coming from Valyria, let's say this one does because of the writing. If it's coming from Valyria, maybe whatever these red priests, which are an artifact of that time, are able to do. Maybe what he touched Vic with will give him the ability to do it. And as far as the theories, go on.
You know, I was gonna say he's got those thralls to do it, but you're right. He's tempted to do it himself. He might just like, nah, I'm gonna do it, you know, because it's weird that he's got that temptation, even though he saw what happened. Like, why are you tempted? It's something weird about that.
He's a weird dude. I think it might come down to the moment of like everything to bring himself to do it. I think it might have to be like that savagery we were talking about before. His self-confidence and like the momentum of his own success might lead him in a moment of like panic almost. Instead of panicking, he might be like, all right then, and do it, and it might work for him in some way. But either way, I want to know. Thanks for holding this laptop still, because I'm banging the table.
Yeah, Hannah, what do you think?
I really want to know how it works.
There's a lot of questions about how it works and if it works and whether it's tied to Euron or it's tied to Victarion, or if the horn is blown, what does that actually mean for the dragons? Do they just leave, or do they just
like to
whatever? Yeah, like do they go immediately to Euron if it's tied to him, or do they just really like the sound of it? I'm not sure.
Like
but
soothing.
I think that something right, exactly, like lulls them to sleep or something. I think that for certain, whether this works in any way that we understand mechanically, I think that it's definitely going to create chaos throughout this battle. I think that I was thinking about Barristan talking about the battle plan and how the different horns will sound for different motions of what's going to happen next, and to listen for the signal of what to do. And I think about all of those horns blowing and then the hell horn blowing, and we've got lots of different noise and chaos. And so I feel like it's setting up for a lot of confusion, whether it works in this mystical and magical way that we think it does or it doesn't. It's going to have some impact on the battle.
Nice.
But
that confusion that could ruin the plan at the wrong. Everything could be going fine, and then someone blows the dragon horn, and then they ruin, like their momentum is shifted, and they're actually retreating when they shouldn't be, and now the forces are coming on them. I mean, it's not good.
Yeah, it has that effect. Like if we think back to what happened to the Kingsmoot, like people were like overwhelmed. Like Aeron himself, he felt like his head was going to explode. And like, what's that going to do if you're in the middle of a battle? Like you're literally fighting someone. You're lifting that sword, like Barristan said. Just keep lifting that sword, keep moving. And all of a sudden, like, what the hell is that? The sound that just comes out. Literally, what the hell horn is that? And
right.
That's a new T-shirt. History of Westeros T-shirt. What the hell horn is that?
Right.
So yeah, it's. As always, this is the kind of thing that we can't really give a real answer on. We can only try to like set the stage as much as possible. I think, I don't know. I think that it's definitely not going to work the way Victarion thinks. I think Makoro is misled Victarion. I think Makoro may also not fully understand because he doesn't really know what's going on with Euron. He only knows what Victarion told him. So I do think there's going to be a surprise with how it's what happens, and maybe the surprise, like you all alluded to, maybe the surprise won't be with the dragons, although maybe there'll be multiple surprises. But I do think that one thing I don't think will happen is that it's just going to result immediately in Victarion's death. That I don't think will happen because Makoro's on the ship with him. Like, what's the dragon gonna go burn the ship? Did Makoro really set that up? Like to to have himself get torched? So I don't know about that. But it's part of why it's such a difficult mystery to parse out, because none of the like basic suggestions totally fit. Like there's problems with like, yeah, they just go fly off to Euron, like all the way to Old Town.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that could
Doesn't make
be,
sense.
but it's like, it's not a slam dunk. You're like, yeah, definitely. It's like clearly it's got to be that. So, all right, here's some quick questions for y'all. You don't have to expand on your answer. You don't have to. You can just give a yes or no answer if you want, but you can expand on it if you want. So these are little questions of fate things here. We kind of segued with the Hellhorn stuff we don't know. This is a little more tangible, not necessarily easier to predict, but there's a lot fewer unknowns. Will Barristan survive to see Westeros? What do you think?
No way.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm glad y'all are divided because that's good. It's a little bit of fun, more fun that
Ice
way.
and fire.
Nice. Okay, so simple enough from Hannah's point of view since she says no. Zach, you say yes. Will he turn his cloak to Aegon?
I think that could be part of his final.
Okay. So if he
let's go further into that.
Okay, so if he does that, any idea like what his final fate is? You think maybe he survives the whole thing, or is that a bit much?
Probably not.
Yeah, that seems rough.
I think it'd be more sweet if he died
either.
at home over something that was less cut and dry. It would annoy me even more if it was a potential Fagon situation.
Okay.
And what if he was the one to see through the veil and like really see who this person is more than anyone else? I think that'd be cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm
I don't
super
know about like.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aziz.
No, I was going to repeat something I've already said. I was just going to say I'm super torn on this one, and folks have heard me go on about it for a while. So I definitely want to hear what you have to say, Hannah.
Well, I just think about all of his chapters leading up to this moment are just filled with so much nostalgia and so much of his own personal history, and he's very reflective onto the decisions that he's made and the decisions that he hasn't made. Why are we? That might be because we haven't had Barristan POVs the whole way through, so now we're filling in some of the backstory. But I read it almost as his chance to kind of think through the things that he's done and the people that he's loved and the battles that he's won and the kings that he's served and all that kind of thing as this grand farewell to this character that we care so much about. I think we'll get a lot more than we got in the show. Obviously, that was pretty much BS to see him being taken down like the way that he was in the show. But I do think that just the way he thinks back on his life is direction of his soon-to-be death, in my opinion.
Okay,
so
right on. That makes sense. Can't disagree. Don't fully agree, but I partly agree for sure. Mostly just uncertainty. Know. Yeah, we just don't know. Yeah, I think you make strong points for sure. So, okay, simpler question. What do y'all think Dany's Silver will survive to be reunited with her? This battle is maybe...
I would love it if... Yeah. I would love it.
They killed her off in the show in season 2. That was like... What's the... What do you think, Zach?
How did Silver die in the show?
Just exposure. Just died in the Red Waste. Just... It's, the Red Waste sucks. Yeah, they're like,
I think that's what's going to happen on the way over to Westeros. No,
the Silver died on his way home to his home planet. Poochie the Silver.
I think probably not. I think Dany's main mount's going to be Drogon moving forward.
Okay, yeah, kind of transitioned, right? Okay. Yeah. We've got a few questions from the live chatters and a few sent in advance. Let's take care of those. Real quick, though, I wanted to draw your attention to a line from Tumco, who says he talks about the Kraken banners when they spot they spot the Victorian ships, which is he mentions Krakens because he's from the Basilisk Isles, and a lot of ships didn't make it. A lot of Victorian ships that were sent through the Basilisk Isles are the ones that didn't show up. Also, we have this notion of Krakens maybe being summoned by Euron through blood or sorcery or blood magic, blood sorcery. And that might be kind of groundwork for that like foreshadowing a bit. Tumco talking about Krakens coming up to take ships might be set up for that. And that's pretty cool. Okay, let's see. We have questions here. Sir Roland de Stark says, sorry late to the stream, but do you think that after the fight, if Barristan can win, will the Brazen Beast let them back into the city? So we brought this up, but we didn't address it directly. I think I'm a little skeptical of that because of the other Unsullied still inside the city. I'm more on the side of Skahaz can do stuff while Barristan's gone, but maybe not that. What do you all think?
Mark?
I would agree. I think that, like we were saying, he's probably seizing this as an opportunity to make moves, but I don't think that his move is going to be to kick Barristan out just yet. I don't think that that's his play.
That makes him
it's like what do you say? Like, say sorry later.
Yeah.
Ask for
forgiveness, not permission. Yeah,
I think
that's a good idea.
Because otherwise, he's just basically saying now we're enemies, which is maybe that's going a little too far. Like that's if he's that worried about survival, it doesn't really sound like the thing you do to survive.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
So now they're both his. Now the young guy and Barristan are both his enemies. Like that.
Right.
So, and of course, that also works better if they let him back in the city. If the idea is that Skahaz will maybe murder Barristan,
sure,
then that doesn't work to keeping him outside of the city either.
Right, when it's a little bit more advantageous for him to do that. I don't think now's the time for that.
Cool. Okay, so we seem pretty agreed on that one. We'll see how that goes. Maura Lee sends a super chat, says happy Sunday to all. Just a show of love and appreciation for all the fabulous content. Well, thank you very much, Maura Lee. Happy Easter to everyone. It is, we don't plan to stream on Easter, but it's Sunday and it's Easter Sunday. Hey, so that's bound to line up, right?
Here we are.
Super chat from Fattest Leech says, keep on keeping on. Hey, Fattest Leech. How's it going, friend?
Leech is on our episode tomorrow.
Really? Awesome. Well,
preview.
She and I were just chatting about the fantastic Kirsten Dunst movie, Drop Dead Gorgeous. Such a good movie.
What?
Have you not heard of that one? It's a mockumentary about beauty pageants in like rural areas. It's so funny.
Nice.
It's super funny.
My childhood.
Kirsten Dunst was like a teenager when it was made, so that's how old it was. But there's a lot of like actors in that movie that were not yet quite famous, who are famous now, like a lot of them. So it's a real treat to go back and see all these like almost famous actors, and now they're like doing much bigger things, including Kirsten Dunst. But there's like Denise Richards. Anyway, I'm getting off track here talking about Drop Dead Gorgeous. It's a really good movie, highly recommended.
Nice.
Yeah, our new Drop Dead Gorgeous podcast starting soon.
Drop Dead podcast.
Yeah, Kirsten Dunst podcast. Stormy 4400 sends a super chat, says, in appreciation of all the hard work you guys put in. Well, thank you very much for acknowledging that, Stormy. We are here because it's a lot of fun, but yeah, we put some work in. Here's a take from Guilty Undertaker. Regarding Unsullied and Fear, the gathering gloom put Bran in mind of another of Old Nan's stories, the tale of Night's King. He had been the 13th man to lead the Night's Watch, she said, a warrior who knew no fear, and that was the fault in him, she would add, for all men must know fear. You know who else makes a quote like that? Of all people, Roose Bolton says Ramsay doesn't feel fear, and that's a problem. Like when Roose is saying your personality is problematic, yeah.
That's when you know.
Yeah.
That is really good. Anything to add to that? That's a really good Guilty Undertake there from Guilty Undertaker.
No, it's a great quote pull.
Nice, yeah. I agree. Koi Vanazi says, I think these boys are all here to be Dany's court knights. George realized he needs more names around her when she arrives. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's some setup is needed there, maybe. Grizzly Meadows says, this is a good take. Grizzly Meadows says, regarding Nina's comparison to Alysanne stopped the first night. The practice of first night, and Daenerys could stop the long night. Oh, nice,
right on.
Nice take. Yeah, that is
both equally shitty things.
Yeah, one's a lot more human in origin, but yeah, very good point, Grizzly Meadows. I like that take. Matthew Dominique says, imagine the silver survives a battle, but Drogon eats the silver. Whoa!
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Oh my god, I didn't think of that.
That would be dark.
We have seen a lot of flaming horse imagery, right? We saw both Dany. There's that horse that is getting more burned by running away from Drogon as she's on his back, and then there's that moment in Tyrion's chapter when Rhaegal or Viserion ignite a corpse, and one of them lands on some horsemen, and that starts running, and it's like the same thing. We interpreted that. Yeah, we interpreted that as like Dany like leading the Dothraki, like they're charging her fire behind them and all that. But I'm open to other interpretations. That's pretty dark, but I can't argue with it. Like, what do y'all think?
I think it'd be we're talking about the things that she needs to shed as she becomes this new person and this new leader. And we were saying earlier that does her silver need to even survive if she's going to be riding dragons all the time? And so it's like almost a metaphor for her next step along the way in her power.
Yeah, it's like Melis the monster
just let
eating its twin in the womb.
Yeah.
Just let Silver go like Bill the Pony. You don't need to eat Silver.
Another take from Guilty Undertaker says, I hope Victarion survives just so him and Jaime can compare hands. Seriously. Yeah, I'm with that. Ego Border says, interesting that Selmy's speech is not unlike the Broken Man monologue, delving into the horrors of war. But Selmy's is actually meant to be inspiring, or at least comforting, whereas, yeah, the Broken Man speech is like, war is awful. Full stop. Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. It's just all about perspective. It's about these in the moment, things have different meaning based on what dangers we're facing and all. It's very human. Max L says, why do people think Barristan dies soon? Because he goes early in the show? For some reason, I thought he'd be around for a little while, but who knows? Well, the show isn't the only reason. It's certainly a suggestion. It's certainly possible. But it's not the only reason. People have been predicting Barristan's death at the hands of the Brazen Beasts / Skahaz since before the show, and the show maybe added a little juice to that theory. But yeah, like he's a good guy, right? He's kind of, I mean, not everything he's ever done is good. Obviously, there's certainly criticisms of him, but like compared to so many other people around him, he's a good guy. Certainly compared to like Jorah and these other folks,
right?
But and it might be more tragic to have this positive element removed from Dany's court, but yeah, it's mostly just a prediction. Yeah.
And I'd also say, like, it's kind of a changing of the guard, so to say, because Barristan's been around for so long, and he's kind of the old guard when it comes to A Song of Ice and Fire. And we've got the bones all the time. We've got, like, the kids are in charge now. Like, the people who were kids at the beginning of this series are now coming into power and coming into their own in this new era and this new wave. And Barristan is very much part of his great qualities. He's part of the old way that things were done, and so doing away with him might also kind of help push things forward from just like a I don't know how to better say it other than like the kids are in charge now. I don't
know. Another good question from Matthew Dominique. Do you think the Battle of Ice and the Battle of Fire are really at the same time? Meaning it's like lined up chronologically on Planetos, or it's just George putting them in the same moment in the book for tension? That's tough to answer, but I think they're pretty close together. I think it would be a little odd if they were several months apart, and there's nothing saying they are together, but there's also nothing really telling us that they're apart. So I definitely lean towards together. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I think so too. It's hard to say by whether, because the end of Dance is so centered on being so far east, but I'd like to think that large news like that would find some way to travel to someone that we're talking to.
Yeah. Yeah. Thomas Taliaferro says, do you think Barristan and Dany burned Volantis? I don't know about Barristan, but I think Dany and Drogon. Yeah, I think there's a very good chance of that, and maybe freeing the slaves. Now, that is an interesting, considering Barristan in light of this is one of the things that might have Barristan thinking he's on the wrong side if Dany's burns a whole city. He might not be okay with that, because after all, Aerys was about to do that, and that might touch on some things that are like, wait a minute.
Right.
Hold up.
Imagine that feeding into his decision if he makes it all the way to Fagan, if he sees all of that, and he doesn't want to happen in Westeros.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a reason why some people think Barristan will live, because there's so much potential for this type of conflict. On the other hand, maybe there's no time for all that. So
there'd be a lot of points of view with Dany too. Maybe we'd lose his point of view. If anything.
Yeah, that's true. They're all coming together like that. It's interesting to show how he's going to parse all that. Having two people in the same location, which one of them does he show the POV through? Like, he's got Theon and Asha together right now, and we've already got a Theon chapter where Asha's in the room with Theon, but it's his perspective, and then Dornish James says the way he is with the squires reminds me a bit of Jon trying to reassure Satin during the battle at Castle Black in Storm of Swords. Oh yeah, really good take. Yeah, that's a good point. Satin was pretty brave, but he also hadn't faced this before. He handled it pretty well, but it was new to him. Good call. Okay, I think that just about does it. I think we have handled all the questions. Do y'all have any closing thoughts or anything you didn't get to say that you had planned on saying?
Let me look at my notes, see if I had anything smart I wanted to say before we wrap this up. No. I don't know. I guess like my closing thoughts are just that this is very exciting, and I can't wait to get to the other side, because I think the momentum for as long as we've been in these chapters and for as long as we've been reading this part of the story, the momentum still gets me amped up. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how this all plays out.
It's a good sign, yeah. About you, Zach?
I don't have any leftover thoughts actually. I think that y'all made such a good doc. So thanks to Joe and Nina, and to you and Ash for putting this together.
Okay.
It was so complete, and it really helped me increase my enjoyment levels of this chapter in general. Just analyzing it with this level of each individual things. Like normally we wouldn't have spent more time talking about Barristan's new nightly appointments in such a specific way, but extending the conversation more is really helpful for me just to enjoy stuff. I love having conversations like this. This has been really, really fun for me just to sit here and to dig into it so much. And so I appreciate you guys putting all the work into making this doc, and it's been really fun.
Well, thanks, Zach, and thanks, Hannah. We really appreciate it. Yeah, it has been really fun. This has been a great discussion, and has some things in common with discussions that we have on the regular, and some things that are kind of unique. I think you guys have a lot of takes that are of the sort that we sometimes don't get into on our show, and that's the value of having y'all on, is that I know we share a lot of listeners, but so many of y'all are more aware of these differences than we are, even because you've listened to us more than we have. We have a different approach to it. So, but from my perspective, I think that's really valuable when we have some overlap on our ideas, but some differences and different approaches. There's just a lot you can do with that, and I think this episode proves that.
It's fun.
So what do you guys have up next? I mean, we kind of have covered that, sort of. We know that you guys are near the end of your Dance with Dragons action, so that's presumably what you'll say. But if there's anything else you have going on, or want to shout out or mention about your show, or what else you have going, let us know.
We have one feast chapter left in the combined reading order.
Okay.
We're gonna get to Samwell. I forget the number.
5, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. So that mixed in with the end with Dance, and then after that, we plan on going into, I don't know if we talked about it on our show yet, but we should just talk about it now. We plan on going into the World of Ice and Fire.
Ooh, nice. That's gonna be fun, because that's been sort of, I don't know, it kind of got set to the side a little bit by the fandom with Fire and Blood and the show and all these other things coming out, but there's a lot of good stuff in there, and to worth re-looking at, given some of the revelations that have come out afterwards. So we plan on getting to the World of Ice and Fire and Valar Rereadis eventually as well, but we're not terribly close to that. We're a ways away from that.
I'm going to start writing fanfic also about what are the towns here? Look at your map behind you.
Bone Town.
Bone Town fanfic is what I'm doing next.
Yep, there's some good stuff there. The map is so good. Okay.
The only other thing I'd say is that we mentioned earlier we got Leech coming on our episode next, who's hanging in the chat, and we'll have you guys on our podcast coming up shortly. So we have a lot of fun guests coming, as well as we near the end of our reading order. So
cool.
A lot of fun discussion to be had.
Well, sticking on that topic, next week our guest is Jim McGeehan, aka Something Like a Lawyer. It's for Barristan 2. Jim has real military experience, so pretty perfect for having an actual battle. Now, that chapter is a summary, not a full read, but it's a very thorough summary. So that's nice.
Exciting.
It's probably the most thorough of the ones that are just summaries, so that's going to be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to that. So let's say thanks. Once again, thanks to Game of Owns for coming today. Thanks to Joe and Nina for their invaluable suggestions and takes that we were able to include in this episode. There are more takes from them in this document. We always have more takes from Nina and Joe that we don't have time for, and frankly, some of my own takes we didn't have time for. And that's one reason to either check out Nina's Tumblr, Good Queen Alley, and or Joe's show, The Isle of Faces, and or check out our Patreon for access to the scripts and documents, which is one of the benefits we have amongst many others. So thanks as well to Ashea for running everything over there off camera, managing so much. Thanks to everyone who came to watch live, submitted questions. Thanks to our friends over on Flick and Facebook and Slack and Discord. Once again, I want to shout out our voice audio project for the Winds of Winter. The Victarion sample is out. It's posted to Patreon. You don't have to join Patreon. There's no subscription or anything. It's just posted there. It's public. No sign up, no money required. Just go there, download it, listen to it, stream it. It's also shared on our Facebook group. So there's a lot of ways to get it. Also in our Discord. So Mercy is underway right now as of this current Easter Sunday. So there's a lot of other chapters that we're casting voices for. So submit yourself if you'd like to for a big role, for a small role, or whatever you think you want to do. We are absolutely in need of as many submissions as we can get because there are, as I've said a few times, literally about 100 voices between these 10 chapters to cast.
That's so cool you guys are doing that.
A lot. Yeah, it has been really fun, man. There's some talented people involved. We're very lucky that they are donating their time for that. No one's making any money off of this, so it is purely that. And it is really fun. It's so fun hearing like recognizable fandom voices just like jumping in for a line here and there. And we've got some surprise folks whose voices are going to jump in later. We may even try to get y'all in there while we're in it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, you guys could get in there.
I'll be go.
Heck yeah.
Go Gore. Yeah.
Max L says, I'm going to write some Ibn fanfic. Just you wait.
Max, I love you.
Max isn't aware. We got to tell you, Max, you don't know what a big fan Zach is of Ib. Zach is the biggest fan of Ib. Zach is the God King of Ib.
Meet you here, Sir Lonnie.
He is. There is no bigger fan. Even Hannah doesn't understand Zach's obsession with Ib.
No.
No one can, really. Okay, folks. Also, thanks to Michael Klarfeld for the intro and the wonderful maps you see behind us. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for the Valar Rereadis music. Thanks to Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval for the regular Valar Rereadis music. Thanks to our Bengineer for audio quality assistance, production, sound engineering, all that good stuff. Thanks to our patrons for the financial support, enabling us to be here every Sunday and spending research time all throughout the week, writing episodes like this and our scripted content and everything else we do. And hey, check out Here Be Dragons, our good friends on YouTube. They are talking Falcon and Winter Soldier today. And I believe, if not, just check them out anyway. It's worth checking them out, whatever they're talking about. Every Sunday at 6 o'clock Eastern, pretty much right after we're done, they are going. So it's a nice little thing to do next. All right, folks, we'll see you all next time. Thanks again to Game of Owns, and you know what to do.
Love you guys. Bye.
Love you too. Valar Rereadis.